Recording in progress.
Okay. It's louder than I expected. Good evening and welcome everybody to the regular city council meeting for Thursday, August 12th. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Vice Chair Goldman has volunteered to do the Pledge of Allegiance. My voice is failing me. Thank you, Councilmember.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. Okay, I would entertain a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Are there any comments, questions, or concerns? Hearing none, it's adopted by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to public comments. Speaking of losing my voice, this is a small novel here I have to read. State law RCW 4217A.555 does not allow the use of public facilities to promote or oppose ballot measures. Promoting or opposing the city's levy lid lift ballot measure during a council meeting would be use of a public facility in violation of state law. This includes comments made during the public comment section of the council meeting. The statute, however, does not limit your ability to support or oppose ballot measure on your own time using your own resources. Then on to the regular public comment missive here. The council will not be accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on agenda items or any other topic the council might have purview or control over. However, the mayor or council may not respond to comments from the public. If the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over, then the mayor or presiding officer may request the speaker to suspend their comments. The council may direct staff to follow up on items brought up by the public. Comments are limited to a 3-minute time limit. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, sir. Hey, we're going to start. Gonna go down the list. I think we have everyone but one person wants to speak. So let's see, we were starting with Prasantha Jayakoti. Did I get close?
That's pretty close.
Okay, please correct me. I'd
No,
like to learn.
You're good.
Welcome.
Thank you. I live on 40th Avenue Northeast. I'm here to speak on the potential crosswalk over 178th. We moved to Lake Forest Park about 10 years ago, and I'd walk my daughter to Brookside every day, back and forth, and that was fine 10 years ago. Now I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore with the increased traffic everywhere, not just Lake Forest Park, but everywhere. We've seen our fair increased traffic on 178th. I do walk my dog several times a day. Half the time I can get across, it's no problem. Middle of the day, very little traffic, but in the mornings and the afternoons, I have to run across the street with my dog because there's just no break in traffic for many, many minutes. And if there is a small break, we have cars that they know where the traffic camera is by Animal Acres, and as soon as they pass that traffic camera, they step on it to get to Bollinger Way. So I'm sure the traffic, I don't know if it's a camera, but the new speed signal there on the corner, I'm sure that has plenty of data showing that it's not everybody, but a couple times a day there's cars over 50 miles an hour there. And we're always glad when we see our local police force, even though we know they're busy. We love to see them patrolling that section of 178th. But it is, with more traffic, it is getting harder and harder to cross on foot. And the other thing I'd say is on that turn from 178th to 40th, that right turn, since it's not a right angle, that is also an area of concern because we live about 30 yards up the street on 40th from 178th. And occasionally we don't have enough time to get across our small lane and a half street because cars are coming around that corner a little bit too quickly and we have to kind of run out of the way. So anything we could do with our increased traffic in the neighborhood to slow down or help us get across the street would be greatly appreciated. We do have families in the neighborhood that walk their children to Pepitas, and in a few years they'll be walking their children to Brookside. And the traffic's just going to get worse in that time. So hopefully we can get it a little safer for us to cross 178th with all the increased traffic. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Let's see, Liz Hawkins. Welcome, Liz.
Hi. I want to start by just making a general comment about Lake Forest Park. People care about this community, the community that they live in, and they really believe that this is a community and everybody's interest should be taken into account. Here you see a cadre of people from 40th Street who came tonight to talk about this issue. We did not meet in my neighborhood, in my driveway and plot. We just showed up because to each of us individually, this is important. I myself cross the street at 40th and 178th almost daily. And of course, if I cross one direction, I'm coming back the other. So that's at least twice a day, most days of the week. I'm almost 83. I don't dart across the street. I don't dodge cars. I don't take chances, but cars move quickly. And that street, 178th, from Brookside Avenue to Ballinger Way is heavily used. People going in many directions. And everybody who walks down 182nd, all those neighborhoods up there, they all come down right past my house. In fact, it's one of the joys of living where I live, because if I stand in my driveway, I see a large population, a large part of Lake Forest Park population, and I love that. And if you haven't been there lately, come on by. I'll probably be out there. I'd love to stop and say hi. So it is an issue of safety, not just my convenience, not just my personal pleasure, but it is an issue of safety. We have a neighborhood of older people who have lived there a long time, and many of them now are aging out, as the saying goes. And we're seeing new families come in, and we're seeing those parents and their children walk to the market, walk to Animal Acres. We see them walking to Brookside School, to Pepitas. It's wonderful to see people walking, but they have to be safe. And they cannot be safe crossing 40th and 178th. It takes a great deal of vigilance. So from my personal experience, from their personal experience, and hopefully some of you have come by too, please do consider this seriously and make that crossing a safe place.
Thank you very much, Liz. Sally Yamazaki. Welcome, Sally.
So first, I just want to say thank you to all of you, because it's really nice to have a city council and a staff that thinks proactively on how they can keep us safe. And I appreciate that. So there are actually three things I want to say. One is, yes, as they highlighted, we all are on 40th. So we deal with the street all the time. When I go to drive, I never make a left because it's too scary, because I think, Prasanthi, didn't you say there's some sort of turn? So I've learned to look at the church's windows sometimes to see if a car is coming, right? You do the same, right? And walking our dogs. We always walk all the way down farther and then go across. We're not gonna, I think your papers say, well, we could go up to where there's a crosswalk up ahead, but who's gonna do that when your direction is to the mall or to Burt Gilman or to the Civic Club, et cetera, or the buses, or anyway, you get my point. So I really do hope you put in a crosswalk there, even though there is another one in its close proximity. I grew up here just like Tom, and we were in the days when you could lie on the street because it was, there was no cars. But now, every time school gets out and summer's there, and I see all these kids going down, trying to cross that street, it just isn't good. And we're lucky that nothing has happened yet. So, so I hope that you do that. The other one is, I was looking at all your maps for healthy candidates to be a healthy street. And I hope that you will consider our little 40th Avenue Northeast, because what happens is now, during rush hour, peak hour times, cars line out past the Presbyterian Church on 178. And of course, they get tired of waiting, so they turn up 40th to go up and cut through. That wouldn't impact whatever you're going to be doing in terms of detours and traffic mitigation for the construction, because you could still go down that 40th, but at least it will stop the traffic from cutting through from down there. So I hope that we can be green lined here. So I think you said we have to get, once we get the candidate to be a candidate for a healthy street, then our community can move forward and, I don't know, I suppose get 70% of the signatures or something. I'm not sure, but I hope that happens. The final thing is just traffic calming in general. Our street has a long history of trying to calm traffic. In fact, at the time when Frank Zink was the public service director, one thing he recommended is to go through and if the city could just cut shrubbery back in blind corners, so and to cut to the ivy or whatever is there growing there, so that people can at least walk off of the road. And it seems like that would be a somewhat easier solution than building a sidewalk. So I hope I can meet Rebecca Dixon sometime to talk about these other two issues. Are you the one I talked to? Okay, that's it. And thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Let's see, Susan, Sarah Phillips. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, I brought you the climate action plan, which you all accepted, and wanted to remind you that you support intersections and sidewalks. By accepting this, it's in the reduced community driving strategy. And then we have underneath that a strategy called develop pedestrian and bike networks. So this is part of your accepted policies to do this. And I don't live on 40th Place, but I'm a walker, and it's hard to walk in Lake Forest Park. It requires a certain amount of vigilance. But so anything we can do that increases visibility on the streets, it increases sort of driver awareness. It gives people safe places to cross and work. It's, I think, enhances the city. It obviously enhances local neighborhoods, but it also enhances the city as a whole, because we all live in Lake Forest Park, and that, you know, if you're a walker, you're walking everywhere. And so I encourage you to take action on adding the sidewalks, and you've already have a policy that says you want to do that, so you should do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Is there anyone else in the chambers that would like to give public comment? Ms. Loomis, please. Within the boundaries of our,
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm
thank
well
you.
aware of
I know I don't need to
25
remind you.
years of doing this business. So I get 3 minutes and I have 3 thank yous and 1 comment that I would like to say. So I want to start out by saying thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, for having me tonight. My name is Liz Loomis. I've worked with local governments for 25 years on helping them educate residents about vital public services. So we've had the pleasure of working with the city of Lake Forest Park, I think at this point for 6-7 months. So that's my first thank you, right? My second thank you is to the council and the mayor for actually recognizing the importance of what residents want. So you did a survey and people came back and they said, we want police and public safety to be a priority in funding. And you move forward, and I know it wasn't easy, but you moved forward and said, yeah, okay, we've heard you. This is what we are going to do. That takes grit. And so I just wanted to applaud you for that. And then the third thing I want to thank you for is your team. So my company has worked with many local governments in 25 years. And I can honestly say in the past decade that the team you have assembled here at Lake Forest Park, between your city manager, your finance director, your clerk, your people are the best that we have worked with in about a decade. So, and I'm not blowing smoke. Oh, Oh,
The chief.
apparently, right? Thank you, 40th Street, because I was about to comment on you too, how wonderful you are. But they are, right? And so I don't come up here and say that to all our clients all the time. Usually I'm very quiet if they're not good. But they are great. And so I hope that you will recognize that. Okay, so I think I have one more minute, Mr. Mayor.
You do.
So my final comment, I just want to say the work you do is hard. Local government, cities in particular, receive the least amount of tax dollars, property tax dollars that people pay, but you get the highest amount of flack. Right? And I'll tell you why that is, because you are the closest connected to the people you represent. And I love the fact that I came behind folks, 40th Street, is that what you call yourself? Look, yep, right? But I love that, right? So people at the local level can contact you, they can talk to you, they can touch you, they can say what they're upset about, right? Did I get the red light?
You did. It's okay. The hook comes.
2 more seconds, please. Okay.
Yes.
And so that's so important, right? Because at the state and federal level, where are you guys going to go? Are you going to go to Olympia and talk about, pedestrian safety and things? You're not. How can you do that? Are you going to testify at a congressional hearing? No. You're not going to go to DC, right? What you do is you come here because people hear you and you make a difference. And so I think it's really important to point out tax dollars spent for cent for dollar spent, rubber hits the road at the city level. All right, clap. Right? Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Lewin.
Thank you. I really believe in what you're doing. Thank you.
Appreciate your thoughts. Anyone else in council chambers that would like to give public comment at this time? You don't have to be signed up. Okay, with that, we will, sorry?
Can I make a comment? Not addressing it.
Yeah, please.
I'd also like to acknowledge that we received a letter from Kim Josen regarding the 40th/178th intersection.
Thank you. Yeah, and as you know, we're going to be discussing this later, and I'll have some updates on some pedestrian safety programs that we're working on here. Okay, with that, we'll close public comment. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Quickly. Sure, we'll cooperate. All right, so we are moving on to Chief. This is a momentous occasion. We're swearing in our new police officer, Kelly Gregory.
Before I start, I want to address a little bit from citizen comments, and I'm glad everybody from 40th Place is still here. Our traffic calming group had the request, I think from Sally actually too, and some other folks on the crosswalk, and we agreed that a crosswalk needed to go in there in the traffic calming group. Our group does not do the bigger projects, so we suggest to the council and to the group there that this is something that we want. So if you guys stick around for presentation E with the Transpo group, I believe that is one of the requests that are in there. So you'll get to hear about what the suggestion and stuff is. So hopefully I didn't overstep bounds, but that is something you may want to hear. So let's get going.
Thank you, Chief.
The Lake Forest Park Police Department is proud to introduce Officer Kelly Gregory to our council and community. So come on up here. So Kelly began his law enforcement career in 2008 as a police reserve with Grant County and started his full-time career in 2009 with Warden PD. After a short time with Warden and Quincy PD, Kelly worked for a majority of his time with East Wenatchee Police Department. Kelly moved to the west side and began working for Medina Police Department. Over the years, he served in a variety of specialized roles, including 11 years as a SWAT team member, 6 of those as the team sniper. He also was assigned as a detective and a field training officer, mentoring new recruits. And I got to say, just before I can step away from here, he is very much about mentoring new officers. That was stressed quite a bit in the whole getting hired on process. His commitment to public safety is also extended to working alongside the U.S. Marshal Service as a member of the Violent Offender Task Force. Originally from the Snoqualmie Valley, Kelly is a proud graduate of Mount Si High School, where he was a multi-sport athlete in football and soccer. His love for the outdoors has remained strong. He's an avid hunter and fisherman and has spent years on the ski patrol coaching ski racing at Mission Ridge. More recently, Kelly has embraced the fast-growing sport of pickleball and now competes regularly. He and his fiancee, Heather, which is here, Heather Tarr, the very well-respected head coach of the softball team at the University of Washington. Much of Kelly's free time is spent supporting supporting Heather's teams and cheering on Husky softball. When Kelly and Heather have free time, they enjoy spending time at their vacation home in Clay Elum, where they enjoy the outdoors. And always up for an adventure, Kelly recently purchased an adventure motorcycle and is contemplating a ride to Alaska. His passion for service, mentorship, and veteran experience makes him a dynamic addition to our police department. And I will say that during the background process, we got a lot of folks that called us outside agencies and says, you guys did a great job in picking up Kelly. So it's a good testament. And I think we're going to get a lot of experience out of you for some of the younger folks that we've hired in the past recently. So welcome, Officer Gregory. Judge, you're up.
So you're on camera for anyone viewing. Come. Come here,
If you didn't put the tape mark on the floor today.
All right, I'm delighted to swear you in. Would you raise your right hand? I state your name.
I, Kelly Gregory,
Have been duly appointed as a police officer
have been duly appointed as a police officer
for the city of Lake Forest Park.
for the city of Lake Forest Park.
Do solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully and impartially
I will faithfully and impartially
perform the duties of the office
perform the duties of the office
as prescribed by law
as prescribed by law
and to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability.
and that I will support and maintain
I will support and maintain
the ordinances of the city of Lake Forest Park
the ordinances of the city of Lake Forest Park
and the laws and constitution
and the laws of Constitution
of the state of Washington
and of the state of Washington
and the United States of
and the United
America.
States of America.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. And I will just make the note that Medina's mayor and police chief are not very happy with us right now. So that's also testament to Officer Gregory's skill set. So welcome. We're very lucky to have you on board. Let's see, we're moving on to Lake Forest Park Library Reads Program. That is, I'm looking in the wrong place. Alice, Eileen, and Alice and Eileen and Lolly, I guess. Just three of you? Make sure I get everybody here. I've got like 7 names, so.
Hi, Lake Forest Park City Council. I believe we have a slideshow that should be ready to go here in just a second. It's nice to see you all again so soon. I'm Alice Darnton. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a regional manager with King County Library System for the Alder region, which includes the Lake Forest Park Library. And I'm joined tonight by Library Advisory Committee members Eileen De La Cruz and Lolly Smith, who you met last month. Thank you for providing the opportunity to speak to you more in depth about celebrating the freedom to read. Oh, thank you so much. That'll make it easier. So first, it might help to understand what intellectual freedom means to the library. In 2018, KCLS formed committees to explore and define our mission, vision, and values. This definition was written by the Intellectual Freedom Values team, drawing on a review of statements from peer institutions, the American Library Association, the Bill of Rights, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'll read it to you. King County Library System affirms the right of everyone to seek out information, ideas, and expressive content of any kind within the law. We are committed to facilitating and safeguarding equitable access, privacy, and an extensive range of constitutionally protected opinions, perspectives, and viewpoints.
Why is intellectual freedom important? What is a book or movie that has had an impact on you? What if you no longer had the right to check that book or movie out from the library? The First Amendment protects the right to freedom of speech, which includes the freedom to access information. From the American Library Association's statement on the First Amendment and censorship, one of the 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, gives everyone residing in the United States the right to hear all sides of every issue and to make their own judgments about those issues without government interference or limitations. The Supreme Court and other courts consider the right to receive information as part of the right to speak. Courts have also considered viewpoint discrimination unconstitutional. The Board of Education versus Pico also quotes James Madison, "A popular government without popular information or a means of acquiring it is but prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both. Knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives."
A limited public forum is the legal definition of a library and explains how it fits into the First Amendment freedom of speech. Basically, this is all about access and privacy. Libraries are designed to be places where anyone can access information and where their privacy will be preserved. With subscriptions and other economic barriers to information increasing, libraries are one of the few remaining places where ideas, facts, and entertainment can be accessed for free. Most commercial information providers track and share our data and our searches. Libraries traditionally do not share this information. Checkout histories are often optional.
Intellectual freedom plays a special role in public libraries and how we serve our communities. When selecting or removing an item from our library collections, we focus on more than the items themselves. We examine the role the item plays in our collections and services. The goal is always to provide the broadest, deepest access to information and ideas that library resources allow, and to represent in some way all of the communities that library serves. Accompanying this freedom to read, view, or listen is the freedom to not read, view, or listen. This right remains with the individual and is always available even when a work is present in our library collection. In the following slides, I'll be briefly discussing the factors public libraries consider when developing our collections and services: scope and demand, representation and socioeconomic considerations, controversial viewpoints, and welcoming spaces. First, scope and demand. In libraries, scope often means how broadly and deeply we can cover a topic or serve an audience. Demand means how much our communities want an item. We have to consider how many copies we may need to purchase to keep up with demand. Good stewardship means considering the cost of resources across categories and interests and how the item will be used. No library can collect everything because both space and budget for purchasing and keeping items have their limits. So libraries use expertise, data, and feedback to help shape the scope of their collections and services to best meet the needs of the community. Next, we have representation and socioeconomic considerations. People using a library view it from their individual point of view, but libraries serve a collective need. We hope to offer pathways for all and reflect experiences both recognizable and new to each user. We sometimes refer to these as windows, mirrors, and doorways, an idea coined by librarian Rudine Sims Bishop in 1990. This means we want you to be able to view others, see yourself, and find new possibilities in our libraries. In our efforts to represent, we also work to remove barriers to access, which might be due to cost, general availability, or a lack of connections. Libraries often serve as a guidepost for other services and resources, helping match patrons' needs with other organizations or institutions. And finally, controversial viewpoints and welcoming spaces. Access is the First Amendment responsibility of libraries. Since broad access is the goal, controversial materials will be available. That said, a patron may exercise their own right to read or not read those items as their values direct. Many book challenges include an element of placement. That is the material available to children's, teens, only adults, etc. Sometimes libraries and patrons seek to resolve a dispute by moving the item in question to another collection, but this can create barriers to rights. It's best to look at the intention and developmental scope of the material and place it accordingly. A picture book or a graphic novel, like a comic book, for example, should not be assumed to be for children or teens just because of its format, but evaluated by content and scope. The publisher, author, or artist's intention should also be examined. Does this imprint only print youth titles? Does this author describe their work as being for young adults or for adults? These factors help libraries decide where to place a book or whether or not to move it. While it may seem like the libraries are the arbiters of information, we don't actually decide what's legal. The courts do, and their definitions are not standardized. Libraries try to be inclusive. The freedom to read is dependent on the library's actions to purchase and offer an item or decline and restrict. There isn't a way to not take action. We have to choose. The decision to purchase or decline must be defensible and based on consistent and legal guidelines and policies. Libraries don't serve in loco parentis, in the place of parents. Family values are individual, not universal. Libraries recognize this by protecting the right of all parents to guide their children through the collection rather than allowing outside organizations or individuals to determine what is available for your family to access. You might have seen stories in the news about book bans and legislation across the country. State laws include attempts to rate books in Texas, restrict access in Arkansas, and criminalize library workers in Arkansas, South Dakota, Indiana, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. Washington State isn't exempt from book challenges. In 2023, the Dayton Public Library in southeastern Washington narrowly escaped being dissolved entirely through a ballot measure after a year of materials challenges. It takes the understanding, knowledge, support, and advocacy of citizens like our Library Advisory Committee members and all of you to stand by and protect the libraries in our communities. A little bit about how King County Library System addresses book bans. We routinely field collection questions regarding the presence of controversial materials in our libraries. We have a process which includes staff and managers having conversations about our collection philosophy and the value of intellectual freedom with a person, and then helping them find something more suitable to them. If the patron who's complaining about an item still has concerns, we can refer a decision about a library item to the KCLS Committee for Intellectual Freedom. If resolution still isn't reached, a final decision is made by our executive director, although challenges seldom rise to that level. However, we do periodically see passive behaviors like vandalism or the hiding of books.
Now the punchline. What can you do to help book bans, prevent book bans, and celebrate the freedom to read? Sign the Freedom to Read statement at the website Unite Against Book Bans. You can also do the things mentioned in this slide, and as Lake Forest Park City Council, you can follow the example of nearby communities like Kirkland and declare a proclamation for celebrating the Freedom to Read Week, which is October 5th through the 11th. After this presentation, we can provide an example of the proclamation the City of Kirkland has issued each year since 2023.
Here are some additional resources to check out, including national campaigns and petitions. We'd like to leave you with this statement prepared by the KCLS Intellectual Freedom Values Team, recognizing the importance of libraries to a thriving democracy. Intellectual freedom enables literacy, lifelong learning, social engagement, and cultural enrichment. It nourishes free speech, a free press, self-education, entertainment, and wonder. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights upholds intellectual freedom as a basic human right. In protecting and promoting this right, libraries serve as cornerstones of democracy.
Thank you again for giving us time to speak to you tonight, and we'd welcome any questions you have.
Thank you, everyone. Colleagues, any questions from friends? It's always nice to see them. Deputy Mayor Furtoni.
Hi, and I wanted to thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's a really good reminder that in these times, there's nothing as valuable as free access to information, especially accurate information. And so I really thank you for making that statement, and we'll be sure to work on that proclamation. So thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Colleagues, any other questions or comments? Thank you so much for joining us. Maybe we'll see you back during Freedom to Read week. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we're moving on to the Green Stormwater Solutions Pilot Project. Director Dickinson and our friend Chris Corwell is here. Welcome.
Hi, good evening, Mayor French, council members. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you today. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Chris Corwell and I work in the Public Works Department as the Stormwater Program Coordinator. I'm here to talk about a new project to install green stormwater solutions to stormwater issues on residential properties in order to help the city manage its water resources, to increase resident involvement in community stewardship, and to promote sustainable practices. This initiative is important because stormwater runoff from urban sources is the #1 contributor to pollution in Puget Sound. These projects will provide an opportunity for residents to be a part of the solution to stormwater issues at the most local level, helping to repair natural processes and increasing the ecological health of our community. The projects I'm proposing are proactive, cost-effective, relatively quick and easy to implement, and would have a positive impact on the health of our community and the greater Puget Sound region. This pilot project would be possible with funds from King Conservation District. I'm planning to tap into $130,000 in funds being held by KCD, collected from taxpayers in the city, and intended for conservation-focused projects such as this. According to our interlocal agreement with KCD, the funding should be used every 3 years, but we haven't done so in 15. I'm envisioning completing 20 projects with these funds, supplying at least $5,000 per eligible project that has applied. $10,000 would fully fund any typical rain garden project or large rainwater collection system, and we are currently considering the best ways to work with homeowners to leverage funding towards that end. The budget of $130,000 could fund up to 20 GSI installations and would include $30,000 in reserve for costs associated with implementing the pilot project. Green stormwater infrastructure initiatives have popped up all around Puget Sound in recent years as policymakers have become more aware of the stormwater benefits presented by these low-cost solutions. Similar successful green stormwater programs in the area include Rainwise in Seattle and Soak It Up in Shoreline. I have both worked for and helped create green stormwater programs like this in the past. We will seek community input in developing our program and incorporate feedback from residents in our planning and design processes. Providing a cost share incentive is one form or another has proven an effective method to promote similar programs across the region. These projects are designed not to trigger costly permitting requirements. Many professional contractors exist who specialize in this work, and participating residents will own and be responsible for the upkeep of their projects. Rain gardens are the main type of project I'd like to see implemented because they provide the most direct stormwater benefits. If we completed 20 rain garden projects, each collecting runoff from 1,000 square feet of roof area, this would result in the removal of 12,000 gallons in a 1-inch rain event like we will probably have tomorrow, or 461,000 gallons roughly of runoff annually. Each of these projects could result in a downspout disconnection, permanently reducing the burdens on our stormwater system, and would result in infiltration on site and back into the natural water cycle. Other project types would include rainwater harvesting through cistern collection systems, permeable pavement systems, removing and replacing existing impervious surfaces, and possibly landscape modification projects, replacing lawns with drought-tolerant native vegetation landscapes. In summary, this would be a pilot project, the goal of which is to implement as many stormwater projects in a 3 to 5 year timeframe as possible with the budget provided. Individual project sites would be vetted to avoid potential risks such as critical areas and to prioritize projects with the greatest perceived stormwater benefit. This project will be designed to minimize costs and risks to the city as much as possible. Participants will own their gardens, which the city will help fund, plan, and implement. In turn, residents will be helping the city manage stormwater runoff efficiently and in a low-impact fashion. Thank you again for this opportunity to speak to you today, and the purpose in doing so is to share this information about this exciting new project. The stormwater program is just beginning. I'm happy to answer any questions you have and look forward to updating you as this project continues.
Right. Thank you for the excellent presentation, Mr. Corwell. Colleagues, questions for Chris? Mr. Lebo.
Thank you, Mr. Corwell, for the presentation. It's very informative. I'm supportive of this and just wanted to understand the administrative cost to implement the program. Is that funded through the grants or is that separate from city funds?
Would you clarify administrative costs is that would be
Your cost?
my costs? I believe that we're considering my time already accounted for, since my position is fully funded.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lebo. Colleagues, other questions? Yep. Vice Chair Bowman.
Yeah,
Little
thanks. I'm excited about us finally using our KCD money. One question: of the roughly 130,000 that we have banked, what fraction would be allocated to this program?
Well, I think currently there's $135,000 banked. I would be using 130,000 of it. I think we've set aside some for a tree project as well.
Yeah, that was actually what I was going to bring up, because the tree board is also looking at a KCD grant for canopy study and just making sure that we're not fighting with each other within the city about projects.
We actually have stormwater requirements. Thank you for your question. We actually have a requirement to do the same tree mapping activity. So I'm excited to see that happen as well. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Deputy Mayor Bertoni.
Thank you, and thanks very much for your presentation. I'm just wondering if you have a timeline in mind of when this would be rolled out.
Ideally, next year we would start taking applications from residents and assessing properties. I'm not sure on the exact rollout timeline. I think that the next year would be mostly planning and preparing for rollout.
Yep, please.
Since I imagine the weather's going to play a little bit of a role in installing these gardens, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Bruno.
So kind of two questions. One, the property does have to have their, let's say their roof drains connected into the stormwater system to be eligible for something like this? Or is that just like a higher priority type project?
Thank you for your question, Councilmember Riddle. I think that it's not a requirement. I think that it provides extra benefits to, to how much flooding happens just here by town center, which with every home that we disconnect from the stormwater system. So,
and then have you considered pre-screened contractors that could make this process go smoother? Maybe not necessarily in the pilot period, but if we were to continue with this, would that be something that you would entertain?
yeah, I think Director Dickinson and I are still discussing the best way to recruit contractors or just a contractor and vet them thoroughly before we start offering that to homeowners. So
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Colleagues, any other questions? Yep.
One more question. I'm looking at the map, and so the priority is the Lion Creek watershed. Does that mean that the eligibility is exclusively for the Lion Creek watershed, or would you consider people in either the McAleer or Bechetla Creek watersheds?
I would consider any resident of Lake Forest Park. I don't want to exclude anyone automatically. The emphasis is put on the Lion Creek watershed because we have previously identified in our stormwater mapping activities that it is our priority watershed for improvements. And doing more projects there will help us towards our goals with our ecology permit. So,
Councilmember Riddle.
You mentioned something that just brought a thought to my head. Would you ever consider expanding a program like this to commercial properties? Because I know that they tend to have a lot of, asphalt, and kind of controlling that at that source would probably be really effective as well.
I think that's another thing that Director Dickinson and I would have to discuss. I think for the initial pilot project, due to the nature of Lake Forest Park, residential properties are our priority. So.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions from Mr. Corwell? Okay, once again, thank you for an excellent presentation. Thank you, Director Dickinson. Appreciate your time. And we're going to have Judge Grant and Ms. Espinoza. We're going to talk about the State of the Court annual report. Thank you for joining us. I know there's a lot going on.
good evening, Mayor, council members, and members of the community. I'm Jennifer Grant. I'm the presiding judge of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Court. I'm joined by Ms. Espinoza, the court administrator. This year marks the 4th year of my term as the presiding judge, and I am so proud to serve this community and bringing justice to everyone and fairness and efficiency. I did a little research, came across this binder. I don't know if you all have seen this, council members. Yes, everyone's saying. Show of hands, who's gone through like this history binder? It was down in a storage room.
I've seen it, yeah.
Tracy has seen it, Councilmember Furtani.
Yeah.
Okay, so looking at this, it has the history of the court going back to 1961. And it's fascinating because when they formed the court, it was just going to be a couple nights a month. The judge who was appointed, Judge Pomeroy by the Mayor Holman, he was going to make $33 a month, and he ran the court out of his home. So he received $35 rent to operate the court from his home. And as we look at the progression, and there's letters from the community going back to the issues that were central to the city and the court, which we'll get into, was really for the citizens, pedestrian safety, all of the concerns that we are talking about, they were talking about back in the 1960s. And so it's just this continuity that we see. The central mission of our court is that we are dedicated to the fair and impartial administration of justice and equal access for all individuals. We're committed to serving with respect, competence, and efficiency. When municipal courts work well, the entire community benefits, from safer streets to stronger civic engagement. And that's what we are committed to delivering year after year. We are a court of limited jurisdiction, so our core services are dealing with criminal misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor charges. We address traffic infractions, photo enforcement citations, parking tickets, and vehicle impound hearings. We also have post-conviction supervision and monitoring through our probation department. A few of the programs that we are engaged in is our pre and post-conviction monitoring. This is to ensure safety. We use Moon Security, which is now called Secure Solutions, to address GPS monitoring, electronic home monitoring, and SCRAM, which is the alcohol detection through a bracelet. We use that for pretrial release. That saves on jail costs if we could have someone out in the community, but have other monitoring taking place. We also use their services for post-conviction sanctions and as alternatives to confinement. Two other interesting programs, we are involved with the UP, the Unified Payment Program, and the King County Interjurisdictional Warrant Program. Working with those programs, we can assist people who have delinquent fines in multiple jurisdictions. They can go to one location, get on a payment plan, and have their tickets addressed so they can have their license restored sooner. It's just easier for them than having to go to every court individually. And the warrant program allows courts in King County who agree to participate, we can adjudicate a warrant for another court if it's under $5,000 and it's not domestic violence or DUI. So if someone is here in my courtroom, I can say, let's call that court. We'll get you a court date. We'll quash that warrant. You'll sign for it and they can go on their way. So many times I'll have people and they'll have outstanding warrants. And even this week I said, well, you need to clear that warrant. He goes, well, I don't have the $100, to go and clear it there. And I'm like, we don't charge people a fee to clear their warrant, but other courts do. And that prohibits them. So they're walking around they could be picked up at any time on a warrant, but they know they want to clear it. They just don't have the financial means to do so. So participating in this program is very beneficial to them. And I think, as you know, youth court. I love my youth court. It is something that occurs outside of court hours, and it is so wonderful. So we are partnering with Shorecrest High School. We have a advisor, Bo Jordan, who's been working with the program for a number of years. It is on an as needed basis. So when we have a 16 or 17-year-old who's picked up an infraction, they can petition to come into this program. And it allows them the ability to earn a dismissal. They come before a jury of their peers and have their case adjudicated there. This last year, we had 3 sessions, 8 participants. They were charged with things like speeding. One did stop for a stop sign. What else did we have? There was cell phone violations. We had a couple cell phone violations. And so the students who are acting as the jury, they ask them questions that are relevant to them, and then they hand it down. So like, why were you on the phone? Why were you not stopping? Were you running late? And most of the time, the kids don't have a great answer, but it's a moment of reflection, and then they get a restorative sentence. So they have to come back with community service hours or write an essay. A couple kids had to do defensive driving courses. So it is a very nice alternative for young people to have a positive engagement with the court and have to answer to their peers. We had 100% compliance with the sentences that were handed down. So that was very positive. 2024 was a little rough. We had some big things happen in 2024. We had an unprecedented outage of the judicial information system. That is the system that governs all the courts across the state. We all gather information from it, from criminal histories, docketing, from all the other courts, all the financials, licensing implications. It's all obtained in this JIS system. And there was suspicious activity, so they shut it down. We came in that 1 week and everything was gone. There was nothing. And it was a little crazy. So what we had to do was do everything on paper. We had to still maintain our records, which is critical, but we had to write it down, keep notes, make copies, and document everything that happened as we would in the computer on paper, so then we could go put it in the computer later. We had 2 weeks of having to adapt and adjust to the system being down. And it was unbelievable. When it came back 2 weeks later, we had all of that work. We had the people that were waiting for their cases to be heard because some cases had to be continued. So we had backlog of cases being calendared. We had our normal work going forward, and we had the work that we needed to backfill in of what had occurred. We were like, whew, we're back. That was a Monday. Wednesday, we had that big storm and City Hall lost power. So then we didn't have power for 3 days. And then we're like trying to figure out, how are we going to do this? And we didn't have power in the court. That was one of the things that was identified as having for our building, is that we didn't have access to the generator power. We don't have plugs in our area. So we were going around to different parts of the building using the light from the window when we could, and did some work. But that was a huge challenge for us, and we made it through. The next challenge, I would say, was photo enforcement as it occurred throughout the year of 2024. We had the legislative changes. They had already been slated to make some changes to the statute, and they were going to come into effect in July. And then they decided they're just going to revamp the entire thing. And so they kind of went in, made lots of changes, and recodified it in another statute. And so city attorney will know how difficult that was, because we were trying to do our work and we had the report. We knew what was going to happen, but it wasn't codified yet. And so trying to make all the changes we need to do was delayed. And so there was a lot of repetition. I know that Ms. Pratt had worked very hard on a lot of things and then had to go back in and make changes. So the amendments brought in some additional challenges and some additional guidance for us. So they capped the amount that could be charged. They dictated where that money would go. We were grandfathered in for, as we already had a photo enforcement program. They have a mandatory reduction for people receiving government assistance or on the WIC program. And so there's a lot of good. It just made us kind of rethink how we were going about our business. And because the statute changed, we had to readdress our notices of infraction and have them approved by AOC. So that was a lot of work. While that is going on, council decided we were going to expand our photo enforcement and do 24/7 enforcement on 178th. And so there was a lot of work that wasn't done by the court, but signage that went up and information that was relayed to the public. There was the racing on that street, which went along. There were studies, there was testing. There was a lot of different things. A lot of information was gathered during that period of time. And there was a big burden on Ms. Espinoza, the court administrator, to kind of oversee with about 6 months of intense work. When we're dealing with the notices of infraction, that does involve the court with the forms that have to go through AOC and what needs to be approved. So Julie was amazing on getting this work accomplished. The racing was out, and then we went into the school walk zone, more studies, more testing, and we finally were able to, that program rolled out in early September. And as you know, 24/7, it was capturing a lot of violators because it was people that were used to having to maybe slow down. And we heard it on 40th Street. They get past that little area, but people are going really fast through that area. And so they knew, like, oh, in the morning, or if the light's flashing, we'll slow. They were really caught by surprise when they're getting a ticket at 1 in the morning. And so there was a huge influx of tickets that came in. And one of the big challenges, this is still falling kind of in my challenges, is that we had a big batch of invalid citations, that the forms that were submitted to our vendor were not put into the system, and invalid non-AOC approved forms got processed. And it took a while for those. It looked like everything was going through beautifully with our codes and running. But when I actually was able to see the citation, when it started coming in for hearings before me, it was like, we have a problem. So we had to pull 3,223 tickets. And a lot of those were people had paid or people had set hearings, but they were not done properly. So we had to address all of those. So that was a lot of backtracking and going in and fixing on top of the new that were coming in. So I put this out there just to let you know that when the city council makes a decision of how they want things to be governed, and our amazing police department goes out and does the enforcement, and then it comes to the court, we're all in this essentially as a big team trying to make the pieces fit. We're separate but equal branch. So I have a very different role, but when you do something, then I come in and see what can I do to make sure that we can accommodate. And that is really what we are discussing. Even though we had these problems, we are doing well with where we are. And we're going to get to that because now I'm going to talk about our accomplishments. And I will be talking about the accomplishments of the photo enforcement program because we got over all that hard things and we have done a great job going forward. I put up 2 items up here that I wanted to talk about. With the interpreter issues, we always want to be accessible to everyone. So a lot of people that are cited with a ticket or they have committed a crime or they have a photo citation, they don't, English is not their first language. So we need to make sure that we are providing them with interpreter services so they have full access. And we are part of a access language program. And being a member of that, we have access to this reimbursement LARP program. So we get 50% of the cost of interpreters back. And it doesn't just happen. It's because Ms. Espinosa is tracking and submitting the appropriate forms. And so it's not a ton of money. It's $3,900, but that was twice as much as the year before. And we really, it's a small dollar amount, but I think it shows the dedication that we try to be very fiscally responsible with the budget we've been given. The interpreters, we set a specific day a month that is for our interpreter cases. So we special set them. We have 2 Spanish interpreters, and we'll probably have a handful of other languages as needed on those calendars. So we really try to be mindful of how we are setting those hearings and spending that money. So we have the interpreter and they can handle 10 to 15 cases for that same block of time that we're paying for. The other big ticket item was the AOC reimbursement. They did say that this issue was on their watch at AOC. They didn't have funds for it, but they were going to try to reimburse courts who had unexpected expenditures, pro tem time or staffing, overtime, getting into that backlog. We had 330 hours of work that we had to dedicate to that backlog, dealing with, I mean, it was 2 weeks, 330 hours to dig out of that. And we put in for all of it. Well, Julie put in for all of it and we got every penny. So I am like so pleased. It wasn't looking good for a while. We'd say, they were like, we can't get funding. And we're like, we still want ours. And so we got that reimbursement and we're very proud of that. So I say that's an accomplishment. So we are currently staffed at 5.9. In 2024, we were at 4.3. We've been growing a bit with the photo enforcement. You've been part of these conversations with the volume we have been able to hire. So we are currently at 4 permanent clerks, full-time clerks. Court administrator is full-time. I'm at 0.6. And Mr. Mitchell, our probation officer, was raised to 0.3. He is in court every Wednesday for our review hearings, and he comes in on Monday so he can meet with people and do his contacts and submit reports. So I'm informed as to the status of their treatment. All right, let's talk about some numbers. So this is an overview of 2022, 2023, and 2024. So you'll see that this is divided up between criminal, infraction, and then the parking, the photo tickets are treated like parking tickets. So that is the bottom line there. And 2022, we had kind of, it was a little higher for the photo, 21, just under 22,000 tickets. You'll remember in 2021 pandemic, when the school went back in, it was 24, it was all day essentially, not 24/7, but it was all day enforcement. So they had, I think it was 30,000 tickets, and the sky was falling with the 30, because it was so many tickets. And that's where we are for 2024. And this year we are targeting, Julie ran the numbers, and 40,
We're already at 30
we're already at 30,000 to date.
projected.
And if it plays out, it's 48,000 photo tickets this year. So it is growing and growing. Some of it looks like on the criminal, it went up, it went down, the infractions, looking at 933 in 2023 versus 644 in 2024. I think some of that, and the chief would back me up on this, the more officers they have, we've had some officer shortages. It makes a difference on how much work they can be going out and being proactive on in traffic enforcement on the street. I know that they are the rapid response for anything, any call that comes in. They are amazing. So that is like the #1 focus. But we are seeing an uptick on the infractions. How that translates with all those filings, this is looking at the amount of hearings that we have. So we have had an increase in our hearings, and it is pretty substantial for the photo enforcement. These, it looks smaller, but we had a big uptick in our criminal. And I think a caveat for why criminal shot up in 2023 is that we are being more diligent on our coding for every type of hearing. So there is a lot of work that gets done and things are set, and it needs to be calendared in such a way that I get credit or our court gets credit for the amount of time we're dealing with each touch on those cases and those filings. So we're really increasing our diligence on how we reflect the work that we do here. Okay, this one is interesting because this is looking at the photo enforcements from when we went live with the 24/7. So that very large. And so this is for September through December. We had just on the school walk zone, that is the 24/7, that's what that's called, 1,900 hearing requests. So these are not the tickets, these are the hearings that came in because people didn't quite understand what was going on. They don't understand the language, the signage. It's like we have so many signs trying to educate them on what it means and that why they are being ticketed. And so it was a very intensive, like, people want to be heard. What that means for a hearing on a photo enforcement, people have a number of options when they get that citation. They can request a hearing. We do our infractions in the afternoons. We do them on Zoom. That is easier for a lot of people that are working. It's also economical for us, so we don't have to have armed security. If we open our courtroom doors, we are required to have a secure space. So if we don't have to have them physically in this arena, we can do it on the Zoom, and that is a cost saving. A hearing could be, so those are, we call them in person, but they're video court. They can have a tech hearing. That is a electronic hearing. They can go right in and email their written hearing to me. It'll come into my email box. It can be a mitigation, which is an admission that the event occurred, but they want to explain the circumstances. They want a reduction in penalty, or it can be a contested hearing in which they are like, I didn't do it. Also in those contesteds would be the opportunity for them to say that they were not driving the vehicle that was registered to them. So they shouldn't be doing that in a hearing because there's a form they can do, but many of those are addressing the DNRs. And then we get handwritten, they do the coupon, so we're processing mail. So we have mail, we have email, we have Zoom hearings. And so that is really where that number comes from. We have afternoon infraction hearings twice a week in the afternoons, and the electronic, the written and email hearings I do most every day throughout, just trying to keep up. I think I currently have 300 in my queue. So those they keep arriving. I will say that we have been, even though it's a lot of hearings, before the 24/7, I never had backlog. I was just like, oh, just kind of get them going. So now there is, but we stay within the timelines and we're not losing any cases because I'm not getting to them. I have a pro tem who is helping me with the written hearings. We can have her assist on those. So really it's been just all hands on deck. My staff is amazing because those hearings are just this little piece of all the cases that come in. Many people may just send in payment, and that sounds like it's very simple. I explained this to you when I spoke last year, but someone just getting that citation and sending in payment, there's still numerous touches that have to happen by the court. We have to docket that it occurred. We have to accept the funds, receive the funds. There's just a number of pieces that go into processing each and every one. So it's not instantaneous. So looking ahead, what I would like to address, it's, we're here in August, so I'm talking about 2024, but if we have a good idea of what this looks like, because we're halfway through 2025 and how these cameras have added to workload. This increased filing, it means that it's going to take more manpower to address the need. So that's more staffing, more judicial time. We were really fortunate that we received new furniture and that was granted to us, that we were able to buy some additional smaller scale desks that could be used. So we were able to fit another person. We have one more space. We have a small office that has room for one more person to be in there. And so as you've heard from everyone, we have a small footprint here in this building and a lot of people doing a lot of good work. So I know that, and Ms. Vaughn is amazing, but she can only stretch things so far. We know this. So looking at adding more people, we have limited space and limited budget, but looking ahead, is that may be things that I will be coming to you saying, this is where we need to grow our staff. If we add more calendars, we're seeing more attorneys representing people. Those go on a special calendar with the prosecutor. That requires more prosecutor time. So I know we're in the midst of looking at those needs. Not that long ago, we had the defense, we contracted to have 2 defense attorneys from the public defense at all of our hearings. So because of the volume, and that's been very good. It leads me to indigent defense and what the Supreme Court, they have dictated that the caseloads need to come down. And that's justified. These public defenders are working incredibly hard and spending very, very little time on their cases because they just have too many. But what that means is that we're going to have to figure out what that's going to cost various cities. And that's not on me, it's on the executive to deal with those contracts. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know cities everywhere are concerned about it. And, we have a 10-year window to get that figured out. A big concern for me and the shortage of attorneys is conflict counsel. So we have our agency that we use, but if there are co-defendants, they each need an attorney that's dedicated to them. Or if they've had cases before, there's just certain defendants that are assigned counsel can't represent. So we used to have 3 attorneys that handled conflict cases. We are down to 1. And we have not been successful. I know the city administrator put a bid out for people to apply to be conflict counsel, and there was no response. So it's been a big concern for me trying to figure that out. And we've had some very serious cases where we were able to find one person who was able to come in and take a case that it was critical because the defendant had assaulted our conflict counsel while he was defending him on a case. And so we're like, okay, we can't have our assigned counsel, we can't have conflict counsel. And so we were able to bring another defense attorney in. But that is stressful and that's really hard in every city. All my judicial colleagues were all stressing about having adequate conflict counsel. And it's how can we share, but really they're stretched very, very thin. So I'm grateful for Mr. Smith, who's been a constant, and he is our guy for now. We have a big opportunity coming our way in 2026 with the CLJ CMS. It's the new operating system that the state is rolling out. In past years, I think you've heard me talk about OCORT, which is a document management system. A lot of courts use that in conjunction with JIS, and it produces the forms and it, speaks to all the different players, and they have an e-filing. And it was expensive. And we weren't sure when this system got rolled out if they were going to accommodate the courts using OCORT. They ultimately said they did, but then we didn't have a lot of money. So I'm not pushing for the OCORT because I want more staff. So we don't have to do that. Because Lindsay was like, is this going to cost us money? I'm like, no, it's not. This is going to just come to us. And I think we're going to love it. I think it's going to be a really, really positive thing for us. We've gone to trainings. We did an onboarding process a couple of weeks ago. 3 staff members came and spent the day with Julie and I. We talked about what we do, how we do it, and they're going to tailor the system for us and what we need. And it will be an interesting journey. Change is hard, right? So going to something new, it's always a challenge. And we will have to shut down our court on May 28th on a Wednesday, push the button and be done. And then on Sunday, we will have all hands on deck for a training, and that Monday we go live. So that is going to be really an interesting process. And so for that, there will be cost associated with having overtime and bringing everyone in, including IT, for that rollout. And that's what they expect and require from us. So that I'm actually really excited about what it's going to mean going forward. And visually, it looks amazing. So I've already talked about all these things. We have a lot of cases. We have a lot of hearings. We have staff working incredibly hard with good attitudes. My goal is to work collaboratively with the council, with the city administrator, to make everything work. When this is a challenge that comes to us, we find a way. We are absolutely committed to serving with respect and integrity and efficiencies to address the needs of our community. And it is absolutely a pleasure to be your judge. And I thank you for having trust in our court. If you have any questions, I'm happy to field any.
Thank you, Judge Grant. We deeply value both of your roles here at the city. Colleagues, questions for Judge Grant or Minister Espinosa? Vice Chair Foreman, sorry, been a long week.
Thanks for the presentation. 2 comments and then a question. The first comment is I had an opportunity to attend a court session recently, and I really appreciated that the court was so focused on rehabilitation and being mindful of defendants. So I appreciated seeing that. Second, I'm fully supportive of you upgrading your software. I had a look at the software, and I'll be honest, it reminded me of something I used in the 90s with MS-DOS. So
Yes.
modernizing that would be great. But my question, our next agenda item is hearing a report from Transpo Group and part of that report deals with potential new speed cameras on 522 and 104. So my question for you is, what resources will the court need if we decide to move forward with cameras in either of those locations?
People. Staffing. It just takes, it's a lot of work. I mean, even receiving the money, we have someone who dedicates like an entire day to receiving the money. We are so careful to make sure that we are documenting everything. So I think it just takes time. Most of that work is done by the clerks, but a fair amount makes its way to me with these various hearings, and a lot of them are written hearings. So it will take, I'm 0.6, and so I have 2 full court days every week, and I have, that extra 8 hours that's supposed to cover everything else. And that is, I'm on call 24/7 if the police need me. I have daily, on weekdays, conversations for any bookings or any questions that occur. And I'm doing, these hearings that are coming in. So I'm over and beyond that time. So looking a little bit at that, but I didn't ask for more time for me at the last go round. I wanted my staff to not be so stretched. And I still am worried. I think that we have a good environment. I think this has always been a happy place to work. I've been pro temping starting in 2013. It's a happy place, but it's a lot, there's not any dilly-dallying. And we are in just as tiny a bit of a lull, if you can call it that, because it's summertime, so we don't have the school zones. But the volume is big and our criminal calendars are full. So
Also space.
space, we don't have, but I don't know how we fix that. We have the space that we have. So those are the concerns. It's really having people that can do the work. Like you decide, the police, make it happen. And then it comes to me and we're not going to drop the ball and let things just time out because we didn't meet it. The timelines. We're going to work and get it done. Just want to make sure that we can do that without burnout.
Thank you. Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you for all you do for our community and beyond. When it comes to the cameras again, are you able, if we were to expand the system, are you able to, as the infractions come in, know where they came from? Or do you not get that kind of information, like which camera it came from?
Yes, yeah.
You get that information? So you could, in theory, compile
Yes.
infraction costs or infraction dollars received by
Yeah.
camera zone. I think that's important to
Okay.
going forward as we start evaluating any additional cameras and how we want to support not only the courts with that extra income, because you got the extra work, but also how do we feed that money back into the community in appropriate ways that respond to where the infractions may be occurring. So being able to have that information would be great.
I do have it all compiled through 2024, so I could just, that's just something that I could clean up a little bit because there's a lot of other information and get that to you.
I think it'd be useful going forward if we decide to add another one to be able to kind of know those zones. And then I think that was it. I think as we start looking at these coming on, obviously you're going to be evaluating your volume and how that's impacting your staffing needs. So we will look forward to hearing from you as we make decisions in the future. And hopefully maybe before we make that decision, we can have a conversation as well.
Thank you, Councilmember. I can just interject since Administrator Hill's not here. He's been working with HR and the courts about a tiered structure for anticipating what the needs and the PD as well in terms of processing. The good news is that the monies that are received through these camera installations are going straight back into the costs of doing review and administration and the courts. So I think we're in a good place. The question it comes down to levels of HR burdens. We have to recruit people to help with the courts, as well as to make sure that the police have been staying on top of it. The courts have been doing a fantastic job, despite 2024 being not an easy. I think everything was thrown at us at once, potentially there, but you did a fantastic job there. And again, the good news is that the monies received from those cameras ultimately are going right back into the system for processing the consideration of the tickets by the judge and the system. And I have every confidence that Judge Grant and the team here are looking at circumstances, and as has been a long history here in Lake Forest Park. And one of the principal reasons why we have a court is to have local consideration and local understanding of whether it's youth court, children's needs, kids' needs, but also local circumstances for people who are here, and whether they're economic challenges, as Judge Grant said about someone not having $100 to clear a warrant, those kinds of things. This is a very compassionate court, and it always has been, and it will continue that way as long, hopefully as long as we're all around. So other questions for Judge Grant and Administrator Espinosa? Yes, Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you, Judge Grant, for the presentation and discussion. So as you look at resources going forward, perhaps if the council decides to increase the number of cameras, are there opportunities for technology or even hybrid work environments or even outsourcing some of the clerical work as we look at, because as a person, as you mentioned, if we don't have space, how do we accommodate them? So it's not just the cost to the person's wages and benefits, but also the ability to have them someplace. So are there opportunities to consider some other alternatives to allow our court system to be even more efficient, recognizing that you have such a dedicated staff that is very efficient today?
Well, Chief suggested I do night court. So he's like, you just come in at night. It's very clever. I think having, as I was mentioning, the pro tem, we have the MIT mails, we call them mitigation mails. So they're handwritten and we can give packets to the pro tem, which I think we should discuss having a commissioner, which is what court, it's basically a pro tem, but they are working more regularly. So they have a more permanent title, but having some of that work on a regular basis going out. Clerk time, there also could be remote opportunities. One thing I will say is that we've been pretty careful about having people present and here on site because there is such a volume of phone calls and people at the window that we need people there to help. And we want to be responsive and be able to get to every call and respond to the emails and help them at the window. A lot of people come in and they don't have a computer or they don't know what's going on. So they will show them the video. They will assist them in that process of writing in their mitigation or contested or taking payment. We help a lot. And that's really important to us that we're not just saying, you can go do that online somewhere. We assist them.
But today we did discover that they might be able to, a different way for them to do online payments. We already have one system, but there is a different system and that would really reduce the interactions. Because if they call us now, then we have to log in and take their credit card information. This other way, they would input it themselves. And so that's a lot of time.
We didn't talk about this, but I don't know. We'd have to explore it because if they come and we help them with the credit card payment, it's 3%. If they do it through the portal, it's 6%. So that can be a lot of money. I have my hearing. I'm like, the best way for you to deal with this is to write a check or come in and pay exact cash. You can come do that at the window. Or just know that there's this fee, because that fee can hurt people. It's a significant amount of money to a lot of people. So yes, we can probably offsite, but as I was just saying, we've been really careful to not just have people like, oh, you work from home these certain days. We've been pretty consistent that we all are here because it puts a burden on the person who's left behind to get their work and then respond to everything. But that is something we can definitely explore.
If I might follow up on another one, I'm appreciate that when you notice that there is an issue with the notices of infractions in terms of the wording that you were able to correct it by recalling them. Was there a need to refund, and if so, how much?
I would have to pull those numbers. There were, I think, at least 250, maybe more people that had paid.
And we had to handwrite checks. So, yeah, it was a big snafu for sure.
We just finished working through that process, maybe, what is this, August, 2 weeks ago in July. And so still kind of pulling from different resources, that information and how much each ticket is. But I can definitely get that to you.
We can definitely get you that 3,200 cases.
Looking down the dais, anyone like to ask any questions or make any comments? Okay, if not, thank you so much for your time. It's very informative. And I do want to look at that. I've seen it. I haven't
Resource.
read it yet. Yeah,
Have not seen it. Come by and visit me. Thank you.
thank you so much, you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Well, we're moving on to, look at that. Our friends from Transpo Group are here. Mr. Pascal, welcome. Thank you. And I would preface this, colleagues, by saying you're going to be reviewing taking a look at 3 studies. This is not a end all be all. This is again one more phase along the program. And so setting expectations with our friends from 40th Place, I just wanted to mention that that program is a little complicated and it's going to take some additional engineering to get that crosswalk built, as well as to consider one of the things, we'll talk about this in a few minutes after Mr. Pascal's had his time, about additional phases that we'll be looking at in the future. So, Ron, welcome. Nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. Good evening, everyone. John Pascal with the Transpo Group. I'm here with my colleague, Drew Heckathorn, who also helped me with these studies that we did for the city. Much of the work that we're presenting here is kind of a follow-on from some of the earlier work we did in 2024 for the safe speed study and looking at speed limits across the city, and also some of the work that some of my other colleagues do in supporting the traffic calming committee. So I have a short presentation here. Most of the information I know you've seen in the memos that were attached to the packet. I'm going to just highlight what we did and then what our recommendations or our findings were, and then kind of open up for questions. If you have questions about details, then I'd be happy to answer those. We were tasked with essentially 3 different tasks, all interrelated. One was the evaluation of speed limits along state highways. The other was potential locations, additional locations for traffic safety cameras, and then a study of a couple locations for possibly new marked crosswalks. All these studies kind of really took into account best practice information, design standards, data that we collected in the field, and our own engineering judgment. So getting into the first task of evaluating the state highway speed limits, you might recall in 2024, when we did the safe speed study, we developed a methodology based upon the NACTO city limits a documentation that was approved by council as your methodology for setting speed limits. We didn't look at the state highways specifically because that's just a very different animal, so to speak, than your local arterials and your local roadways. And so what we wanted to do this time around was to collect more data, but also not only to use the NACTO methodology, also respond specifically to WSDOT feedback that we'd received or the city'd received through letters and other information over the last few years. So we wanted to kind of have this be more comprehensive. And so we collected data, but we also used the city limits methodology in looking at SR 522 and SR 104. And the map in the slide deck and also in the memo highlights the data, the locations where we collected data along both of those corridors. So we didn't collect data on every segment, every block. It was very strategically looking at kind of where speeds and volumes and things might be a little bit different on each segment.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm confused. On that previous slide, it said the study did not address speed limits on state highways, but your last bullet said you used the city limit speed limits methodology to evaluate speed limits on SR 522 and SR 104. I thought those were state highways.
The previous study, the safe speed study in 2024, did not address the speed limits on the state highways. And this time around, we were using the city limits speed limit methodology as part of this task.
So this summary refers to 2 different studies.
What's that?
This slide refers to 2 different studies.
Correct.
Okay, that's my confusion.
Yeah, sorry about that. So for SR 522, some of the things that the state specifically mentioned when they made speed limit changes to segments in Kenmore and Bothell, where they looked at very specific roadway characteristics related to things such as medians, sidewalks, landscaping, presence of driveways, crossing point density, and other kind of other characteristics of the roadway. And what they were saying was, in their analysis, was that Kenmore and Bothell were very different than what you see in Lake Forest Park. But when we actually looked at the data, it actually was very similar. So Kenmore might have more commercial driveways. Lake Forest Park actually has about the same number of driveways. They just, more of them tend to be residential in certain segments. So this whole thing about the number of driveways and the density of driveways, they're very, very similar. And so we were trying to make an argument to the state that, when you look at the characteristics objectively, that they're very similar for all the municipalities. And so we put together this table: crossing point density, the characteristics of the roadway, and then proximity to some other criteria that we identified in the safe speed study: proximity to park, town center, and then some of the safety history really points to a speed limit consistent with what's found on the southern end of the segment as you head towards Seattle at 35 miles an hour, and then as you enter Kenmore and Bothell at 35 miles an hour, that the corridor should be a consistent speed limit. For SR 104, and this was a question I know that I think a couple council members had, was we really focused on the southern segment of SR 104 from 35th Avenue South. And the reason we did that was because the speed limit was changed a year ago on the northern segment, I believe from 40 to 35 or something like that. And so when we were collecting this data, we collected this data last fall. And so we felt that that speed limit had just occurred, that change had just occurred, and we wanted to have more time for that to kind of be reflected in the data. So we really focused on the southern segment. And what we found was, if using the same criteria, looking at the various different characteristics of information and the proximity to some of the school and the town center, and then the safety history, that it really pointed to a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit for that segment. And I'm going through this quickly, and we can come back to questions. Like I said earlier, there's a lot more information that went into this. I'm just hitting the high level.
Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Pascal while we're? Yeah, Mr. Goldman.
Yeah, so you had mentioned that you didn't feel comfortable recommending any speed changes on the western segment of 104 because it was too recent. So I suppose my question is, at what point would it be appropriate, in your opinion, to recommend additional speed changes there?
I think a year or two after, and so I think we're kind of at that point where we could take a closer look at that segment now that it's been a full year. So it's going to be up to the council. Yeah.
If I'm expressing my opinion, and I had asked you this by email, but if you use the NACDO methodology, the western segment of 104 would also have a speed limit of 25. So it seems to me that if it has been some time, and if our target speed limit is 25, I think we should be pushing WSDOT on that. So that's my personal take.
Councilmember?
You're correct that the characteristics of that segment would also fall into that 25-mile-an-hour category. The only thing I'd note with the NACDO speed limits methodology that we put together is that, that was very targeted towards your arterials and your collectors and the characteristics of that. We didn't really consider the state highways and kind of the different functionality that they do have. So while the current methodology points to 25 miles an hour, we might, if we're really going to look at that segment more, we might want to just kind of give that a little bit more evaluation and that perspective, because I know the state's really going to push back when it was 40 miles an hour going to 25. That's going to be a really tough pill to swallow for WashDOT. So anyways, that's just
Not
a little
pushing
bit of
back as
feedback.
much as they were before because the road conditions are they're now saying we might have to evaluate lowering the speed limit because the road conditions so bad. So Deputy Mayor Furtani.
So thanks for your report and really thorough memo. And I'm going to dive way down into the weeds here.
Sure.
So, okay, so in table 1 regarding SR 522, you have the posted speed limit, average daily traffic, median speed, and so forth. And there are 3 sites. The specific one I'm concerned about is State Route 522 north of 165th. And for the most part, all the numbers kind of make sense, right? Because we're kind of a pass-through city. Our residents go north as well as south, that kind of stuff. So you'd expect northbound and southbound to be roughly the same number on a daily average traffic volume sort of thing. And yet that particular site, north of 165th, there's approximately 4,500 more cars going northbound than southbound. It doesn't happen north of there. It doesn't happen south of there. And the only reason I bring this into question is because it seems like such a huge inconsistency. It's almost a third of the traffic volume is gone. And I wonder basically, does it call into question the reliability of this data?
I don't have an answer for you, right?
That's fair. That's fair. I just wanted to
we'll
bring this
definitely
up.
look into that and check
Okay.
that out because yeah, that does stand out as an anomaly. All right. If there's no other questions on the speed limits, yeah.
Please continue.
Mayor, do you prefer kind of taking questions by topic area? Would that?
I think that would
Yeah,
probably be
okay.
useful
Yeah,
for
that might
everyone
be
to
easy.
stay. It's a lot of data to process.
Yeah.
So.
So the second task was looking at potential additional locations for traffic safety cameras. And as you know, the state law was expanded to allow for different additional locations, particularly for speed safety cameras. And part of the RCW requires evaluation of safety aspects to locate cameras, along with an equity study. Our focus was just looking at the safety in the data, not evaluating other things that you obviously would have to make decisions about, impacts to the court, police, et cetera. Those are things that were outside the scope of this effort. This was purely just looking at the location for a camera. And we looked at three different scenarios or situations. One was speed cameras along the state highways, both SR 104 and SR 522. An additional red light camera along SR 104 and 35th Avenue, recognizing that you have a couple along SR 522 today. And then an additional speed camera along 178th Street, essentially in front of Brookside Elementary. It kind of right in the middle of the 2 existing cameras that are out there today. So those were very specific locations that we were tasked to look at. We weren't tasked to look at the entire city and come up with a prioritized list of locations. It was a very concentrated focus. So for the 522, what we found with the data, that there was 2 possible locations where we were seeing a high prevalence of higher speeds, a higher number of vehicles that were traveling 5 miles an hour or more over the existing posted speed limit today. And that was one north of 165th, and then also just east of SR 104. And those are denoted by the red circles on the map. On SR 104, the location that really stuck out was there by the elementary school, Lake Forest Park Elementary, particularly the straightaway after you come around the corner if you're heading southbound from 35th. And that's where that other red dot is located. But that by and far had just a high number of vehicles that were exceeded 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, which would be the point where you would be issuing tickets or citations. Those also corresponded to some records of collision and other kind of vulnerable users, particularly the SR 104. The red light camera, we looked at citation data, we looked at speed data, we looked at collision history, at this intersection. We couldn't find any data that really supported issues related to running the red light. Now, we're not saying that doesn't happen. We're just saying that we didn't have any data that supported or justified a camera at that location. And so we're recommending that either that just kind of be put on hold for now, or if new data comes to light, you know, we could reconsider that, but we're just not recommending that being a viable location for a red light camera. Maybe there's other other solutions that we could consider, but a red light camera, it just didn't seem to fit with any of the data that we could find. And then,
Councilmember Riddle.
I have a question.
Sure.
Back on the 35th. Is there data related to collisions and other dangerous things happening at this intersection, just not specifically related to red light issues?
yeah, we looked at all the collision types and the type of crash records, and looking at for any contributing issues related to people maybe trying to speed up to get through or not paying attention, or, you know, congestion related, or and none of the crash records that we saw kind of pointed back to an issue related to red light running. Yeah.
Would you say that there is a significant number of crash records there not related to red light? Or was that of the norm amount? What's the normal
I
amount?
don't know that offhand. Drew, do you know?
You can respond
Yeah.
later too. I'm more just curious if it's an intersection we should still consider having a need for us to look at.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. So that location has a relatively low amount of collisions recorded, only 1.5 annual average at that intersection.
Okay, thank you very much for that follow-up.
Thanks, Trip.
Folks, any other questions? Okay, please continue.
And then the final location that we were asked to look at was in front of Brookside Elementary. We had a lot of recent data that was collected after the 2 cameras were installed and operated to monitor speeds 24 hours a day. And what we found was that the speed compliance there between the cameras is actually really was really good. There's very few vehicles that were exceeding the speed limit, and even a smaller amount that was exceeding 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. So if you install a camera there, it probably wouldn't pay for itself. So that was kind of the bottom line, that you're really seeing a change in travel behavior and speeds with the existing cameras along that location.
Councilmember Riddle.
Comment. And maybe this is just me misremembering, but I thought we were seeing if another camera would be warranted on the other edge of Brookside Elementary where your third triangle is. Was that not, did I misremember?
Where are you describing? I can talk about the corridor if you like. So the task here was to decide whether or not increasing. Oh, I see what you're talking about. 37th?
37th, retasking that camera to also be 24 hours, just like we did with the 2 on 178th.
We had not considered that because of the volume of citations there is so low compared to the 2 other cameras. But so the question of the corridor, where the study that they conducted was where the original camera was placed many years ago and then removed. There's actually an installation place there. And so the question was, could we place another camera there to make sure people are obeying the speed limit coming away from the camera around the corner? Because parents and staff members at the school had mentioned this. We did not ask Mr. Pascal and his team to look at the other ends of the corridors where your speed is sign is. That's a future consideration, because per our friends from 40th Avenue, excuse me, there are definitely needs at 28th and potentially at 40th Avenue for considering people speeding out of the school zone, out of the school walk zones.
And I think we should, as a council, relook at 180th. A lot of people I've seen personally are using 33rd as a cut through, and they come down 180th to avoid both cameras, and they're doing so at excessive speeds.
Sure.
And I know that wasn't part of this study, but something for us to think about.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Lebo. Moving forward.
So I'm gathered that this was a very targeted study. And so, is there not technology where you can purchase, the data, for example, of cars moving through Lake Forest Park 24/7, which would indicate what the speeds were for on a aggregate level? Meaning you could generate basically heat maps of our roads through Lake Forest Park compared to the speed, because everybody has a cell phone and there are companies that track cell phone data to generate. I mean, that's how we get all the traffic data, for example, that shows what areas are busy. Are there companies that will just, if you ask them, they'll produce a heat map for Lake Forest Park showing these roads, the cars at these times are 5 miles and over the speed limit, blah, 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 as a way to sort of prioritize where you might do a more targeted study?
Yeah.
Because there are, I mean, on 180th, if you're doing the speed limit, you must be doing something wrong. And then there are others, such up by Horizon View off 55th is a very convenient way to get to 35th, and going up or down that hill seems to be an opportunity that you can, shall I say, not be seen. So my question is, are there opportunities where very quickly we could produce the data that shows, hey, rather than a targeted study, let's start with an overall picture of Lake Forest Park, and here's the heat map that shows where the speeds are exceeded by 5 miles an hour on this basis, and you just overlay it with the data and collision and say, this is really where you should be looking.
Yeah, I mean, there is information out there, like you described. And so I think if that was of interest to the city, of kind of a comprehensive evaluation, right? It's a doable thing. It just, that type of information does cost money. It's not free. So we'd have to, scope that out and figure out how much. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Lebo. Other questions? Okay, please continue.
Okay, moving on to the last task, which was evaluation of new marked crosswalks. And again, this was a very targeted study. We were requested to look at 2 locations specifically, one at 178th Street and 40th Avenue. So definitely heard the comments from the residents earlier tonight. And then along SR 104, right by the Forest Park condominiums. So those were two locations. I know, I think there's a lot of past history at both locations from my understanding. And so we wanted to kind of provide a solid recommendation on what the city might consider here. When in doing this evaluation, we looked at the roadway characteristics. We looked at kind of the site-specific considerations about where a crosswalk might go, whether it's an appropriate location. And we took guidance from some of the best practice information out there on locating essentially crosswalks at uncontrolled intersections or mid-block crosswalks, and also the WSDOT traffic manual, since the one crosswalk on SR 104 would have to have some concurrence with WSDOT. So just looking at each location real quickly, our recommendation was that providing a marked crosswalk on 178th would be warranted, as long as it was a high visibility marked crosswalk, that it was west of 40th to improve kind of to provide maximum sight lines. There might need to be some restriction of parkings, some installation of lighting or other warning signs. And it could require some additional unforeseen capital investments around the stormwater system or ADA ramps. Those were things that we didn't get into as part of this, but if this was of interest in moving forward, those would be things that would have to be scoped out and looked at in a little bit more detail than what we got into here. As part of this, we would also, likely recommend some roadway geometry enhancements shown on the bottom graphic there, just to kind of realign things, to kind of bring in vehicles at a more kind of perpendicular angle to 178th. That provides kind of slower speeds and better sight lines with pedestrians. And that could all be done with painting and markings and things like that.
Mayor Tony.
I really like this part of your report, and one of the things that I very much appreciated about it was that these changes to the geometry of the intersection really would help with those people who take that curve way too fast. So I've almost been hit a couple of times on my bike there. So I really appreciate the fact that this will slow people down at that intersection. The other thing I very much appreciate is I learned a new acronym, which is the RRFB, the Rectangular Rapid Flashing Beacons. I thought that was a great acronym. But that reminded me, there's a lot of intersections, busy intersections in various Asian cities that I've seen that have light up sidewalks. And I know that a lot of these beacons are visible for the people who are in vehicles across the street, but not necessarily that visible for people who are trying to cross the street. So I'm wondering, can we do something more of a visual cue? Because there's already with those kind of push the button and basically wait for the signal, auditory cues that say basically, yeah, it's safe to cross now. But are there visual cues, like for instance, a light up sidewalk bit that turns green and most of the time it's red, that would indicate that it's safe to cross for somebody who is hearing impaired?
That's a good question. I have not seen something like that, but I'm sure there's probably something like that. Drew, does anything come up? We haven't designed anything like that in the past. That's all I can say. So, yeah, but that's really interesting.
That's a good question. As Mr. Pascal indicated, this is something to consider if council chose to move forward with this. This is one of the things that was talked about you'll notice in your packet, it was talked about 2 years ago, I believe, or a year and a half ago at the retreat, and scored very high. And then the specific engineering would be invested in, and then we can consider different types of.
I just would say the RFBs are usually situated in a place where when someone does activate them, they should be able to see them flashing. So I think they would address probably the hearing impaired type of situation.
Colleagues, questions about 178th and 40th, the crosswalk there? Let's go. Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
You have your recommendation. Do you have a sense of what a minimum amount we would need to do that can be done quickly, i.e. before school starts? Is there anything that you can recommend at that level, even if we were to go to this full recommendation eventually?
Well, I think what we're recommending there is a minimum of striping work and some signage. And the issue is we'd have to look at the ADA access. We wouldn't want to be able, we would be out of compliance if we installed a marked crosswalk without the ADA component. So you'd want to do that all at the same time. That would be what increases the cost.
Thank you. Colleagues, let's move on to SR 104.
So the other location that we looked at is kind of denoted here on the map. We looked at a number of different guidance materials, particularly from WashDOT, and what it showed is that this would be a crosswalk where you would need to provide RRFBs, so the flashing beacons, because of the speeds, because of the volumes of the vehicles. It's a much higher speed, higher volume roadway than 178th. So so this would be a likely location. But we also recognize that we want to provide a crosswalk that provides the shortest path to where people are wanting to go, right? Because if it doesn't, if they have to kind of walk out a direction to get to the crosswalk, they might not use it. And so what we have seen is the reason, one of the main reasons for the crosswalk at this location is to access the transit stop on either side. So we want to have that crosswalk as close to the transit stop as possible. Best practice information says that you really should locate crosswalks directly behind a transit stop. You don't want to put them in front because then if they get, if a pedestrian is getting off the bus and trying to cross, that's where that could be a hazard there if the bus driver doesn't see the pedestrian. So that's why the crosswalks are recommended behind the bus stop. So that's why we showed it there, but it could be with a survey and more additional evaluation, we could kind of look at moving it up or down, depending upon just where it makes the most sense from the infrastructure out there. We'd also recommend some kind of necking down there just to kind of bring there are some wide shoulders there to just kind of bring that feeling of the wide open roadway, kind of necking it down with some a bulb out where the crosswalk would be. So that's our recommendation. This would have to be further coordinated with WashDOT. And this would be probably a little bit more sizable capital project than the one along 178th.
I can provide a little context here too, and Mr. Pascal's being very gracious because my question was, could the crosswalk be a little bit farther to the south? If you look about 50 feet, no, it's a little more than that, 75 feet to the south, you're looking at 30th Street. And there's a little street end there, and then there's an undeveloped right of way to directly on the bottom of your screen that you cannot see that connects. It's a place that the city could use for a walking route and connect all the way from Mount Lake Terrace, all the way down through the neighborhoods, down to town center. So it's just a thought. There might be a situation where we could talk to Metro and say, hey, if we move this, put a crosswalk here, would you be willing to move the bus stop a little bit closer? I don't know whether the geography would allow that, but thank you for bringing that up.
And I believe that's the end of our presentation.
Okay. Colleagues, questions for Mr. Pascal? This is just preliminary. We're moving forward. Vice Chair Goldman.
Just a clarification, thinking about 522, the data you collected, did that include the intersection of 522 and 145th Street?
No, we did not collect data that far south. Yeah.
Okay,
and that's and correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of the jurisdictional boundary of Lake Forest Park and Seattle, right? Okay.
Might I editorialize briefly?
By all means.
So I live near there. I find it to be a dangerous intersection. I actually kept a road journal for a full year of all the incidents I had as a pedestrian. And I found that on average, once every 10 days, I was nearly hit by a car trying to cross that intersection. Usually because a car ran a red light or made a right on red without yielding. So I would like to see us looking at that intersection. Also, my observation is that the Seattle DOT does not care about that intersection. They have made it more hostile to pedestrians. And so I think it's got to be us. If we don't look at that intersection, no jurisdiction is going to. So I would like to see us as a city looking at including that intersection.
And when you say looking at the intersection, you're talking more broadly than just a traffic safety camera. You're talking about just safety at that intersection in general.
Yeah, any sort of road improvements, whether it's better crosswalks, signal timing, no right on red, but just a holistic approach.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, Councilmember Good.
How far south did you go on 522 in this study?
Let me pull up that map. I think it provides a good.
I couldn't quite tell.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. Oops. So you see the blue dot there at the south, and right before the speed limit changes from 40 to 35. That was the last kind of data point that we collected information.
Do you know what
for.
the street is?
Yeah,
I think
It'll be 38.
38, which is.
Yeah, probably around 155th. Yeah.
Okay. That's the answer I wanted. Should be 153rd though.
You want, yeah, I mean, what was the exact spot?
The exact spot was 300 feet north of 153rd.
Oh, that's 300 feet. Okay.
Okay, even
That's
further.
That's acceptable.
Thank you, council members. And to Councilmember Goldman's comment about 145th, we've had conversations with, well, back up for a second. King County owns part of that road. Seattle owns the other part of the road. We've got shoreline. We've got, it is a jurisdictional mess. But we had conversations in the past with Councilmember Dombowski's office about the acquisition of the north half of 145th Street. We have on our task list right now doing an evaluation of what the risk is with that, because it's a very challenging road and what the liability could be in terms of maintenance. So that's something to consider. But it does, if it gives us a little bit more opportunity to be masters of our own destiny, if we do actually have skin in the game with the road. So something we can talk about. We'll keep you informed on that. Colleagues, other questions for Mr. Pascal? Councilmember Lebo.
So I guess maybe this is a general question, and then I have a specific in terms of what are the next steps? Because as I understand, to locate, for example, these traffic cameras, there needs to be an equity study.
Correct.
And then I would be interested in understanding how these cameras fit in. There's sort of two tiers of cameras. There may be, in fact, more tiers of cameras, but how does this fit into our overall program? Because the other, and this is, I asked about, you know, is there technology or you can purchase, here are the speed limits, here's all the data you can gather for your city so that you can say, well, it's great that we've looked at these targeted locations and we've ruled out our recommendations for a couple, but are we missing the larger picture, which is, are there other roadways that would benefit more? And then another comment, Kenmore is going to have mobile traffic cameras, and how does that fit into solutions for Lake Forest Park? I mean, they must have done an equity study for the entire city to say that we can put these cameras on a mobile basis within certain areas, and that fulfills the requirements and so on and so on. So my comment is, great targeted study, but council setting policy wants to always look at sort of what is the big picture, and are we missing the other needs because we become so focused? So next steps, and can we look at a bigger picture?
Yes and yes. And some of the next things that we're going to be considering, some of these are driven honestly by the requests from the community. 197th, for example, near Horizon View, that's a real challenging area. So on the list we have right now, and this is just not inclusive, but these are some of the requests that we have, and I know Chief has a lot more than I do. The 24/7 school walk cameras at 40th Place and also 35th Avenue. The expanding to the 24/7 expansion of the 178 camera program on both ends, because we've heard of people complaining about near 28th and also near 40th. Park cameras option at Animal Acres on Brookside Boulevard. That's an authority that the state gave the cities a number of sessions ago. Horizon View Park at 197th. That's really the only camera that I think would be authorized in that area. And then talking about additional crosswalks, a lighted crosswalk at LFP Elementary near the bus stop there. Very concurrent with the place where Mr. Pascal was suggesting that we could potentially have a speed camera. And then intersection improvements at 37th and 104 right next to LFP Elementary. That is a very strange place there with people walking behind the bushes and the trees, and everyone who walks there has nearly been hit at least once or more, and that's another consideration. Those are sort of a grab bag of things. There are other things I know that the chief has in the hopper too. And to your question about a more broader program, that's something that we definitely can consider. I personally was thinking about seeing if we can sort of not cherry pick these, but look at the low hanging fruit where people have had requests and then go from there. We're also talking about closing off some roads too, dead ending them. Councilmember Good, and then Councilmember.
Well, thank you for the study on 522, but I think it should have gone further south because it looks like that would be between, that potential camera there would be between 165th, which is a traffic light, and Town Center, which is a traffic light, and it's a very short stretch of area. Yet when they gear up off of 145th, and if 153rd is green, they just race through there. So, and that is a blind corner. There's a lot of people coming out of driveways. There's a lot of people that, depending exactly where you started the study, you may have missed several condos of driveway. Like there's only one driveway and there's, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 people that live down the driveway. So I think moving it a little bit, I'd like to see it moved a little bit further toward 140, I include 145th and 153rd, because I think that a camera there, it would not be, because there's two lights on each side that's very close. You have a much longer space between, say, 153rd and 165th, where they zoom around the corner. And it's really not safe when you're trying to come out of a driveway there. And there's a lot of condos right that come up there. There's a lot of, actually down 155th, I think that we counted, there's over 100, there's almost 100 residents that come up 155th. That's a dead end. They can't get out any other way. So when they come out, they're just stuck there as the cars are going by. So maybe.
Thank you, John, for your patience. Please. You had a follow-up, John?
Just that I very much appreciate the comments that we get from the community, because they are the ones who are experiencing this directly. But I also would like us to have sort of a big picture and not just miss it because people on 180th aren't commenting or so on. That we are more data-driven, and that we have an opportunity to be more global in the approach of it, because there are tools out there that we can use, not just put rubber tubes across the road to gather the information. I'm concerned that we're too focused, and that that our list may just be because somebody called and said, somebody's speeding on my street tonight.
Thank you. One other contextual thing before we let our friends go here. Councilmember Good, the question arose quite a while ago about a red light camera at I can't, I'm confused. 153rd? Where's the light? Is
153rd is the
153rd. It's not eligible. It has to be intersection of an arterial. And so the question about the 35th red light camera, some of you may know this, but I'll just refresh everybody's memory. We are allowed to add one additional red light camera that goes to general fund revenues. We were looking at every option to use that authority through the state. Unfortunately, we simply don't have the lights that we could use that additional authority. And apparently the data does not support it at 35th. I think that's the last one because of the nature of our community. So we might not be able to utilize that authority. Deputy Mayor Fortoni.
And I appreciate Councilmember Lebo's approach of taking a more holistic view of where the basically the speed zones are in the city on a much more widespread basis. But barring basically being able to fund such a study, what would next steps be for instance, the 40th and 178th crosswalk? Is that a matter of amending the capital improvement program or plan?
I wish I had Administrator Hill here for this. I do believe that there are maybe some short-term kinds of things we can do. We do have the funds to pay for these improvements in the 002 fund. The question about the ADA compliance is an important one. Unfortunately, it is very expensive, and it takes a while to spool those things up. So I think in terms of next steps, if council wanted to give us a head nod on, we could bring this back 1st of September on a list of things to say yay, nay, up, down, and we don't have to necessarily prioritize them. We could say, if you wanted to say go on all of them or don't go on any of them, we could go down that path, and then we can move forward with figuring out what the cost basis will be. Yeah, Councilmember Good.
One more, I think two more things. One,
Could the additional traffic study be paid for out of the traffic safety fund?
Yes.
Okay, number two, if you did a more broader study to look at the city more,
Sure.
as more overall. Yes, maybe you can't do one at 35th, but maybe that, if you did a more overall study, would that possibly bring to light another location where you could put a
Potentially.
camera? Then I say that's.
So then the question is if, as we're real.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I just want to reiterate that we had our meeting with the Shoreline School District,
Mhm.
and it came to light that obviously we should be addressing routes to schools, but also routes to bus stops. So I've heard from several community members that their children's route to the bus stop is also dangerous. As well as like 40th being the route to the school for walking routes. So I don't know if we received that information from the school district to be able to overlay on any of this work that we do, but I want that to be another layer that we contemplate as we start collecting this data more citywide.
Thank you for that. And I think we'll probably, Chief's not in here, but Chief and I are meeting with both principals coming up here in the coming weeks before school starts. And we will solicit input from them about their concerns and needs as well.
Please do, please do.
Okay. Vice Chair Golden.
Yeah, so looking at the cover sheet kind of says our actions are to either accept or not accept the studies. I think it would be a good idea to kind of break the studies up into pieces that we could look at our next meeting, because I think where I'm at is I vary between either accepting one of the recommendations versus thinking we should go further. So a couple of things that I've talked about tonight are looking at the speed limit on 104 west of 35th, expanding the study zone of 522 all the way to the city border.
Okay.
So I don't know that I'd feel comfortable just blanket accepting the study, but other parts of it, I'm totally on board with lowering 522 from 40 to 35. So I think it might be good to sort of get some council head nods on individual pieces of what are in the studies, while also looking at next steps for what other data could we benefit from. For instance, what Councilmember Lebo said with, can we get speed, aggregate speed data citywide?
Yeah. You're talking about subsequent council meeting, or you're talking about now? Subsequent. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I did want to ask you all, the question about the 40th. If there is head nods around the horn, we could probably sort of jumpstart this to try to keep momentum going. That crosswalk, is that something that, do we have any, is anybody opposed to moving forward with getting some more data back to you about what it would take to, in a program? 40th
Remember you just talked about
78. Yeah.
I mean, certainly I'd appreciate a cost estimate, or at least a rough one. Yeah.
Okay.
That is good.
But this seems like there's a urgency here that I'm hearing. So
Yeah,
let's.
and I would say it seems like it's very difficult for us to get something by the time school
Yeah.
gets started, but if we
Yes.
could look and talk with the chief about having perhaps there be an officer crossing guard there.
Okay.
To enforce the idea of a crosswalk there.
It's a very
Because the
popular
kids will
place
use it.
for our traffic safety officers to sit.
Exactly.
So, thank you. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Pascal or his colleague here? Thank you very much,
thank you
both
all.
of you. Really appreciate it. And clearly we have more things that we'll be communicating with you about.
Yeah,
So
of course.
Bill and I will be in touch.
All right.
Sure appreciate your time.
Yeah,
very
have a good
much.
night.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
may we entertain a short break? It has been a while.
I want to get through consent calendar.
Okay, we
Can
can do that.
And
That's
this is-
easy.
I want to feel successful. I feel like we're making some mileage here. So I'd entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar.
Oh,
Second.
All those in favor of adoption of the consent calendar, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
thank you.
You bet. I know, I can't feel my feet.
That's a bad sign.
Grunting stretch.
Everybody ready? And welcome back, everyone. We're back in session now. We've actually made it to the second page. Lots of good conversations tonight. And Director Vaughn is with us. She's been very patient. We're on Ordinance 25-1311, amending the 2025-2026 budget. Director Vaughn.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I am going to quickly go over our budget amendment that we have been talking about for, actually, I think we started this back in June. It might have been before then. So just kind of some highlights, overviews. When we do budget amendments, I'm just going to go into this. Your budget is a living document, just like your personal finances. It is very normal to have changes. And so amendments are a normal course of a budget process. So we're gonna just walk into the first one of within the general fund. And two of the items are the police services. So basically we get reimbursed by third parties for providing security services. And the police overtime needs to be expanded. That money is coming in as revenue to the city. Therefore, it's just a pass through. That money's coming in and we're paying it out to our officers. So it's just a pass through request. The next one is that the police department did receive a grant. So again, that is actually something new that you did not see on the previous schedule of adjustments. So therefore I tried to shade it. It's very faint apparently on this, but that is a direct pass through too. So it's a grant of just over 43,000, almost 500. And then you're going to see it's tied below to supplies, office equipment, and dues and subscriptions. So, and that directly ties out. So it's a direct pass through again for money coming into the city and then what the police department will spend on it going out. So as basically after we adopted the budget and the court came asking when they could expand the probation officer, it was quickly identified that a mistake was made, and originally it was an original budget request that we did not increase the probation officer from a 0.2 to a 0.3. And so now brought that back to you, and we started those conversations, I believe, in January or February. So this is the actual act of expanding that budget that was intended to be in the original adopted budget. The police department's CBA, their collective bargaining agreement, I should not use shorthand, was not adopted at the time we did adopt the budget. We did our best educated guess. And it does need to be expanded just a smaller amount, but it does need to be expanded to match what was actually agreed within that collective bargaining agreement. So then going down to some of the additional expenses, the court and municipal services, those two departments are kind of were working together to get Laserfish across the finish line. If you remember back in the spring, our clerk brought forward the cost estimate. We had a cost estimate when we did during the budget preparations. What came out of that was that it was going to be more than what was originally budgeted for by an additional $12,000. And so at that time, through a budget and finance committee conversation, it was requested to move that forward. And here is the conversation of expanding that $12,000 within our actual budget. The next one down is a gate for a park that needs to be put in. So the request for that. And then walking down to, this is definitely the definition of unforeseen. We do the best we can with the information we have, and the facilities, City Hall, we've had some definite unforeseen repairs that have cost us some money that have needed to be paid for out of the general fund. And so this is an expansion of the professional services and the repairs and maintenance within the general fund, expanding to cover some unforeseen building maintenance that has had to take place. in order to keep our health and safety of the building. I'm gonna just keep walking through, and then is that okay, or
Colleagues?
are there any questions on the general fund? Keep walking? Okay.
Great.
Perfect. Moving on to the traffic safety fund. Within this fund, actually, the court during their presentation just nailed it. They, when the traffic safety additional cameras, their footprint, they had to increase staff, their footprint, their desks didn't meet what the staff requirements. So we had to have a company come in, redesign their areas, get them smaller desks to fit more personnel. So that's the request here. We didn't have a budget allocated, I'll just say that, for small tools and equipment in order to do that expansion and that rearrangement of the actual footprint for the FTE increase. And then walking down to the final line item on that, as part of the vehicle conversation, it was agreed to pay for 2 vehicles, police vehicles specifically, fully outfitted out of the traffic safety fund. So this is the expense and going out of that fund, and you'll see it when we walk to the vehicle safety fund as revenue coming in. Going down to the surface water capital fund, this was a change order for the public works material bin. There was contaminated soils. I feel like you have heard that quite a bit at this point. This is the actual expansion of that change order in order to allocate it to the contractor. And then the final fund discussion is the transfer in from the traffic safety fund for the vehicle and equipment replacement. The public works equipment, that expansion of $34,000 is to maintain our sweeper. At the very end of 2024, we had to take the sweeper into to NUD, and they basically gave us the news that it was gonna cost us a little bit of extra money in order to take care of that properly. So we're expanding that, as it was definitely unforeseen and not budgeted. And then walking down to the police department, the vehicle replacement and the public works replacement, those have been talked about thoroughly. What's in there is 3 police cars. I guess I shouldn't call them cars. SUVs, vehicles, police vehicles, outfitted, and then a transport van. And then within the public works is an F-150, a Chevy 2500, and an F-550. And then walking down into the salary exhibit A, because that is an addition of what gets changed within adopting this ordinance, the budget amendment. So we did increase the probation officer from the 0.2 to the 0.3. And then we also updated the police department salaries, so they now match the CBA. Now, if you recall, within 2025, there was one increase within that CBA to do the first portion of the year, the first 6 months, and then there was an additional increase starting on July 1st. What is reflected in this salary is what went into effect on July 1st. So it is what's currently in effect. And so it was the police, all of the guild, and in addition, our commanders, to make sure that there isn't compression. And that concludes my overview of the budget amendment. Are there any questions?
Colleagues, we're legal.
Thank you for the presentation. So as I read this, there's about $220,000 net difference for the general fund.
That is correct.
And it appears that that is being proposed to be taken out of our general fund unallocated fund balance. And looking at it, we also have the budget stabilization fund. And as I read it, that's intended for what would appear to be this kind of thing, which is mid-biennium adjustments. And so to me, that reads as sort of a contingency that's established at the time that you set the biennial budget, and that would be the place to take the monies for the additional expenditures. Is there a reason why we wouldn't use that particular budget fund?
I guess the city could do either. I mean, we could allocate it from the general fund unallocated ending fund balance. Or the city could look to the budget stabilization fund in order to support that delta.
The reason I would suggest for the council to use the budget stabilization fund is to think of it as a contingency for the biennial period, and so that it's established at the time that we establish the budget. It also has provisions for increasing that amount if we want to, but it's sort of like otherwise a budget with no purpose. A budget item with no purpose, because in fact it says that it's for as part of the biennial budget or mid-biennial budget deliberations and after funding, blah, 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 blah. That we think.
There isn't a right or a wrong necessarily.
It's an unallocated, it's just that as a concept that we established in the budget, a contingency for the purposes of recognizing that we don't know everything when we establish a biennial budget, and therefore we set aside monies to address what will be my mid-biennial budget adjustments in the first and second years potentially. And so we just say, this is what we're doing. This is why we have this monies here.
I would offer, I'm sorry, Mayor Bertoni, go first, please.
So thanks very much for your report. I appreciate it. It's very clear as always. And I think the concern that I have about using that budget stabilization fund is this is still the first year of the biennium. And as you said, Councilmember Liebel, that there is basically this budget stabilization fund to deal with contingencies arising from the mid-biennial budget adjustment, which we haven't talked about yet. So I'm wondering if this should be just left for the second year if anything comes up at that point.
Councilmember Good.
How much is in the budget stabilization fund?
I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my.
65.
Yeah,
But-
that's what I was
It's
thinking.
65.
Historically, the city has always used the unallocated fund balance in order to address general fund budget amendments. And the city has not within my time frame looked to support it through the budget stabilization fund. That being said,
Oh, I see.
I'm going to circle back to what I originally started with, is there isn't a right or a wrong on this, on how the council would elect or desire to see us go about addressing that.
I would just offer that I believe I was co-chair of budget then when this was created. It was more reserved for exigent and emergent situations. So to Director Vaughn's point, I don't believe we've ever used anything other than unallocated fund balances for these true ups. And I think that there may be more circumstances in which the spirit of it was written. So I would have concerns about using that right now, but at the same time, council could consider changing policy if they so chose. Please, Mr. Lebo.
I'm not suggesting we change policy. In fact, I'm suggesting that we follow policy, and that perhaps just because we've had a practice that not become the precedent for continuation, rather that when you develop a budget, you should consider that you are going to have these kinds of changes, and that you should be thoughtful about developing a contingency for which you can tap. And part of the budget process says, well, what is an appropriate contingency that we should carry for the next 2 years to recognize it? So it becomes part of your budget tool bag, which says, okay, how much money should I set aside? And then as I go through the budget, how good have I been towards managing that? If you just tap the unallocated, you really lose the sense of what you've done and don't have a record of saying, well, this is what we budgeted and this is where we ended up at the end of the year. we thought we needed 5%, and in fact, we only used 4%. Whereas if you just tap the unallocated funding, it gets obscured.
I wouldn't characterize it that way.
Well,
But-
because what happens is at the end of the year, your unallocated goes up and down for a variety of reasons. And it can go up and down because you see additional revenue. Or it can go down because you see if you use it to tap for additional expenditures. Whereas if you use the budget stabilization, it is what it is. Meaning if you budgeted 346,000 and you spend 200,000 of it, you're gonna have 146,000 left over. You know, it doesn't get obscured, you know.
Okay.
Besides, it's all the same money.
Deputy Mayor Furtani.
I don't know if you were going to answer, but.
I was gonna offer a suggestion, maybe more so than an answer. If the city was looking to use the budget stabilization fund in that manner, because historically, I, as your finance director, have not been exactly using it in the manner of which you're stating. I think that would cause for me to go back with a little bit of pause to actually make sure that we were using it in the manner of which it goes both ways, in which you're stating, and not just to do a more holistic evaluation of if the city and the council desires to use it in that manner, that we make that decision together.
How about
That's working.
suggestion? Why don't we read what the description is? Like, I'm looking at it right here and it's there's a chapter 3.68 council contingency fund, and it has very specific, I have not read it, so I don't know what's in it, but why don't we all read it so we familiarize ourselves with what's supposed to, and contingency fund and 3.88 stabilization fund. We should read it, see what's in it.
I can,
No?
Deputy Mayor Furtani.
I don't mean to cut you off if you're trying to answer, but is there any compelling reason we need to pass this tonight?
absolutely not.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but that was a bit of, but yeah,
Right.
no, we
Okay.
can hit a pause button on.
Yeah, I think we need to all,
Absolutely not.
you might need to think about this. And one thing that would help me out is what has the budget stabilization fund been used for in the past? You know, for instance, in the past biennium, that would really help me kind of think about this.
I can definitely answer that basically since I have been here, that fund has generated interest only and been left alone. I can guarantee that, I can tell you. As far as how it was used previously, I would have to go back and look. And that's part of why my recommendation of what I just stated was to just hit if the council does desire to use that fund in a different manner in which we have used it previously, I would, in my opinion, I think it would be worth hitting just a pause. And if we're not going to adopt this tonight, that is absolutely okay. We can bring it back, but just go back and look, because there are some additional funds. They do all roll together. Okay, so we're talking about funds that, yes, they have an individual fund number, but technically, I don't want to lose sight that it is one bucket of money. Whether we're talking about the unallocated ending fund balance or the budget stabilization, and I don't want to get into too much of splitting hairs. And so probably need to stop right there.
Yeah, Vice Chair Goldman.
Yeah, so I guess the way I see it, there's sort of a short-term and a long-term question. The short term is what you presented tonight, which is here's how the budget needs to change. The longer term, I think, is more of a policy question, is what is the role of the budget stabilization fund? How much should be in it? When should it be used? I'd be okay with taking a hybrid approach, and perhaps at our next council meeting, we approve the budget amendment that you've proposed, But then we also bookmark for a future Budget and Finance Committee meeting to have that discussion about what is the role for this fund moving forward.
And we could do that. We could do exactly what was proposed about looking and supporting the general fund balance out of the budget stabilization fund. It whatever council desires, or if we do want to bring it back to a budget and finance committee to have a bigger conversation, if we just want to fully hit pause on this budget amendment and maybe have a bigger conversation and wrap it into a mid-buy, I'm okay with either whatever council's desires are to make sure that we
I think that's
all on the same
that's fine.
page.
Councilmember
One more
Good.
thing, I'm fully in support of your budget amendment. But when we have these funds that are outlined and that there is specific documentation written about whatever they are and however they're supposed to be used, we don't know. I mean, as a council member, I don't know what's in the document that I want to read it. I want to read it and see what it says, because if it does lead itself to accommodating the coverage of the amount, then, again, why would we have it if it's not supposed to be used for that? What is it there for? Is it just a parking lot? Well, maybe it shouldn't, so it is a broader discussion, but I think we should bring the rules so we can read them. I'm all for that.
I'm just gonna offer, prior to your previous finance director and myself, this city went through a lot of finance directors. Doesn't make it right or wrong. Everybody has a different way of approaching finance. Therefore, there's a lot of these additional funds that are within the budget stabilization fund. There's a lot of the other funds. There's different approaches. Again, it does not make it right or wrong. It's just a different approach. And so I'm going to offer that that's why some of these funds are there. I'm just owning that I, as your finance director, have not used this budget stabilization fund as council member budget chair Lebo is presenting and requesting this evening. I'm telling you that directly. What it does state within the intended use of that fund is exactly what he's stating. Okay, so it can be used for that. I'm suggesting that can be used for that. And what I'm saying is we just haven't done that in the past. It doesn't, again, make it right or wrong. I'm wondering if it's just a pause for a bigger conversation on how we desire to use some of these funds, and then we can go about it in that manner.
I don't understand why it is such a big deal not to take a look at it and read about it and figure out, well, what's it really about? And there seems to be a lot of pushback of doing that, maybe we should just do things the way we've always done it. And I'm not really, personally, I'm not really satisfied with that answer.
I apologize if that was how that came across, because that was definitely not my intention of saying just because we've done it in a certain manner, that is the way we've always done it. And anybody that has ever worked for me, whenever they say that answer to me, when I ask them a question, that doesn't really go over very well.
Deputy Mayor Furtani.
So I apologize if that is how you perceived what I stated.
I'm not pointing at you directly. I'm including all of us in that.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that if this conversation is starting to chase its own tail, so I think we're all saying the same thing. We just need some more time to reflect on this. Let's read that part, as you said, Councilmember Good. Let's basically ask our finance director the questions that we need to ask, and then reconvene at some other point to basically talk about this again. It's just that there's no compelling reason to basically pass this now, or not even, or even just fold it into the mid-buy
We
adjustment.
can do that, absolutely.
right.
We can, yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
And just a reminder, the two funds that were referenced tonight, contingency was explicitly created for opportunities for the council for one-time, not for operational costs, not for general fund types of purposes, specifically for example, the purchase of something and then have it repaid. So we have that distinction there, but we can absolutely look at the history and take a look at the descriptions and see what makes sense. We do have one more. Thank you, Director Vaughn. Is everybody okay with where we are? Okay, thank you. We have one more agenda item, and Kim has been waiting very patiently. Attorney Pratt, we have Resolution 25-2023 authorizing the mayor to execute the Purdue Pharma Sackler family Washington State-wide opioid settlement agreement and the Washington State-wide opioid settlement agreement with 8 manufacturers of generic opioids. Seems like we talk about every couple of weeks, but Right? it's all right. Thank you for. Yeah. We love getting other people's money to help out with some problems. Right. Very important problem. Yes. So multiple states, including the Washington Attorney General's office, have sued manufacturers and distributors of opioids, alleging injuries suffered as a result of opioid-related addictions, death, and other diseases caused by the named companies. And so you've got more settlements in front of you tonight. One is with Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. And then the others are a generic settlement agreement with 9 manufacturers. And so what you're being asked to do in all of these documents is you say, Lake Forest Park agrees to these settlement agreements. And then in your resolution, you would authorize the mayor to sign these 10 documents. One of them is an allocation agreement with these 10 entities, or 11. And the other 9 are participation forms for the 9 manufacturers. So I have looked at the generic settlement agreement, because you're saying we agree to this. I have looked at the generic settlement agreement, and I have looked at what they gave us for Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. That document also has to be approved by a bankruptcy court. So we're reviewing a draft, but I don't think the Attorney General's office would give it to us if this wasn't in a very final form, but it does have to be approved by the bankruptcy court as well. So, and I'll say these documents, we're not assured this money yet. Enough of the counties and cities have to sign up and say, yes, we'll participate, we will release you from any liability. And then the manufacturers and Purdue Pharma all go, okay, there's enough of them, we'll settle. So it's not a definite done deal, but it has been for all the other times this has come in front of you. The deals have never broken up enough. There've been enough participation. The city's percentage is the same percentage that you originally agreed to in, we call it the One Washington MOU. And so that hasn't changed. What has changed a little is what you can use the money for. It has to be spent on certain things. Opioid remediation, I think is the term they use. You agreed to a whole list of things originally, and the 9 manufacturers have added some additional things, quite a few. I don't know if any of them would apply to what you might want to do with the money, but we did do a chart so that when things come up, you can see if the money can be used for those. This has to be for Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. You have to make a decision on that by September 30th. The Attorney General doesn't have a deadline for the 9 manufacturers, but they're telling us it'll be about then anyways. So please consider them all at the same time, which we don't want to have to come back to you again anyway. So that's probably better. So we're asking you to agree, look at them and sign the resolution for all of them. One thing that is in these that we have never talked about before is the distributors and manufacturers in these settlements, they pay money, but there's also an injunction. So they don't do this again.
Great idea, right? And so I read through, the injunction itself is 16 pages long, but I'll give you some of the highlights. They cannot engage in the promotion of opioids. They cannot promote products that treat opioid side effects. Their employees can't be given volume-based incentives. They can't pay kickbacks for prescriptions. There is a ban on funding third parties through grants or in-kind support that promotes opioids. Kind of trying to close the back door there. And they can't produce high dose opioids. I have written down here 40 milligrams, maybe. So I just thought that's a very good idea, rather than just paying money that you're going to use for great things. They also can't promote opioids anymore. So, the materials in your packet does say that we are asking for one touch on this, just because this is something you've gone through multiple times. Of course, you need another touch. We can give you another touch, but we are saying this might be something that only needs one. So any questions? Happy to answer.
Colleagues, questions for Attorney Pratt? Yeah,
Just
Councilmember.
a clarification. It's the 8 manufacturers plus the Sackler, right?
9 manufacturers plus Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family are all in one.
Okay.
I'm assuming the Sackler family has something to do with Purdue Pharma.
Because I just want to clarify, because our cover sheet refers to 8 manufacturers.
Boy,
I
cover
wanted to
sheet
make
may
sure
be
that-
correct. I have 9 written down. 9 manufacturers.
And then attachment 2 lists. I don't know. No, that's not them. Anyways, I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Participation.
8 or 9 of them.
Let me see, what page are we on?
Vice Chair Golden.
I'm reading the email from the Attorney General's office, and it also says Purdue Sackler plus 8 manufacturers.
Okay, there you go. It's 8. I misspoke. Thank
It's
you
okay.
for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, any other questions? If not, Vice Chair Furtone, Deputy Mayor Furtone.
That's right. So thank you again for the summary, and appreciate the, just putting it in language that I can understand. So as I understand it, this is about 20,000 a year for the next 15 years then?
Think over, yes,
Okay.
when I looked at the spreadsheet.
Right. So in the past, we've used it on things like Hope Stream and Narcan for the officers in training. I imagine we'll probably end up using it for similar sorts of things. But is there any chance that the expanded thing, and I don't understand the language of that big table that has all the
Yeah.
additional uses. Would it be something that we could even think about for Racer? For the
I did, reading a couple of those explanations, that did come to my mind as well.
okay, great.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent question.
Yeah.
So we're looking for action tonight?
So I would waive the three-touch rule first, right? Okay, so
That's correct.
I move that we waive the three-touch rule on resolution 2023.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to waive the 3-touch rule regarding resolution 25/2023. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. The suspension of the 3-touch rule passes unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. Deputy Mayor Furtone.
I'd like to move that resolution 2523, and this time I'll read it, authorizing the mayor to execute the Purdue Pharma Sackler family Washington State-wide opioid settlement agreement and the Washington State-wide opioid settlement agreement with 8 manufacturers of generic opioids.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt resolution 2523 with suspension of 3-touch rule. Any further discussion, colleagues? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. It passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Pratt. Excellent work as always. We have nothing here for council discussion or action. Or is there any other items of business? We're at 10 o'clock. Yes.
Yes, I'd like to move to excuse Councilmember Saunders from this meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded to excuse Councilmember Saunders. Any further discussion? All those in favor of excusing Councilmember Saunders signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
Nay.
Okay, let the record show the vote is 5-1 for excusing Councilmember Saunders. Any other business? Okay, Councilmember reports. Anything burning that everyone should be aware of? Deputy Refer Tony.
Not related to myself, but in the city administrator's report, I wanted to give a shout out to Chief Harden and his wonderful PD about the dogs. That was a great,
That was very
that was a great story.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Council member reports. Okay, council committee reports. We haven't had any. I'll be extremely brief. National Night Out was a lot of fun. Some of you probably heard the rumors. I had an unexpected ride along on a very interesting ride. But it was incredibly instructive. And our PD handled a very bad situation incredibly well and ended up being 3 jurisdictions. Came to a close in city of Seattle, Stoneway and 145th. And Commander Adams and the rest of the team did an amazing job. I was worried what is that car that I was in? The little hybrid Escape, the Flintstone car was not going to be able to keep up with the suspects, but it did. So, and his outstanding driving kept us safe. Chief called me right when I got back to City Hall, and I told him my blood pressure didn't even go up. I felt so secure with the skills of our team. So hats off to them, and I want to make sure in a subsequent council meeting we recognize the 3 officers that were involved. It was absolutely exemplary police work. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, I hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Any further discussion? It's adopted by unanimous consent. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.